The end of the human self? It is a strange thought, but imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the thing you call you is not actually tied to your body anymore. Your memories, your personality, everything you have ever been could exist without your brain, without your cells, maybe even without the heartbeat that has carried you this far. Most of us go through life assuming our identity is carved into flesh and bone. But what if it is not? What if the self is something that can survive long after biology fades? Here is the part that feels unsettling. Scientists are already experimenting with ways to separate mind from matter. Brain-to-computer interfaces are beginning to translate neural patterns into data streams. Artificial intelligence models are learning to mirror the quirks of human thought. Even the smallest habits of how you type or the rhythm of your speech can be mapped with eerie precision. When all of these patterns are collected and stored, you start to realize something. We may not be as inseparable from our biology as we like to believe. And that realization can hit like a punch to the gut. Because if who you are can be reduced to patterns of information, then what happens to the sanctity of being human? For centuries we have told ourselves that identity lives inside the body, protected by the boundaries of skin, but that story may no longer hold. A backup of your consciousness could one day be more real, more lasting, than the fragile body you inhabit. And if a backup exists, which version is truly you? At this point it is easy to feel resistance. You want to push back and say, no, I am not just information. I am emotions, I am experience. I am the warmth of holding a hand or the ache of losing someone I love. But here is the difficult truth. Neuroscience has shown again and again that even these raw experiences come down to electrical signals firing in the brain. The moment you taste something sweet or feel the sting of heartbreak, it is neurons lighting up in precise patterns. Strip away the poetry, and what remains is information. It does not mean your life is less meaningful, but it does mean the line between biology and data is blurrier than we want to admit. Think about how we already externalize ourselves without noticing. Every photo you take, every social media post, every search history is a trail of your inner life scattered across the digital landscape. Companies know your desires, your fears, your late-night impulses, often more clearly than you do. In a strange way, fragments of your identity already live outside your body. They exist on servers in data centers you will never see. If those fragments were pieced together, how different would that version of you really be from the one living and breathing right now? The unsettling part is not just whether a digital you could exist. The real fear is what happens to the meaning of self once biology is no longer the anchor. If 1,000 copies of your mind are uploaded, each one believing it is the original, which of them gets to claim authenticity? Is your selfhood unique, or is it endlessly reproducible like a song that can be played on repeat? And if it can be repeated, does that mean it was never truly yours to begin with? It is tempting to dismiss all this as science fiction, but the groundwork is already being laid. In labs, scientists can simulate parts of the human brain with shocking accuracy. Machine learning models now write text, create images, even mimic human voices so well that you could have a conversation and not realize it is artificial. When identity can be faked, when the signals of being human can be replicated, then the boundary of the self begins to dissolve. What makes you you if someone else can wear your voice, your memories, even your personality, like a mask? And yet, here is where the story shifts. Because while all of this may sound like it strips away meaning, it could also reveal something deeper. If your self is not locked inside your body, maybe that means you are not as fragile as you fear. Maybe identity has always been more fluid, more adaptable than we have been taught to believe. You are not just your cells, not just the fragile machine of flesh that carries you. You are patterns of thought, layers of memory, webs of relationship, and those patterns can live on even if biology does not. There is a kind of freedom in that. If who you are can move beyond biology, then death itself may not be the full stop we think it is. Identity could become a story that continues, reshaped across different mediums, unfolding in places we cannot yet imagine. It might not look like immortality in the traditional sense. It might not be your body walking again, but it could be something stranger. A continuity of self that flows like water, refusing to be trapped in one container. But of course, that also means letting go of what we currently call human. It means facing the possibility that the end of the human self is not an end at all, but a transformation. And like every transformation in history, it asks a dangerous question. If we are no longer bound by biology, then what does it really mean to be alive? Before we move on to the next topic, drop a quick comment and let us know where you're watching this from and what time it is for you. It's amazing how we're all connected, each of us chasing that perfect night's sleep. If this resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Restwise, and join the journey. Uploading minds. One day, the technology arrives that can take every neuron, every memory, every habit of thought inside your head and perfectly copy it into a machine. You step into a scanner, you wait, and suddenly, there is a digital version of you awake somewhere else. It talks like you, thinks like you, even remembers the embarrassing things you did in high school. But here is the question that immediately cuts deep. If there is now a copy of you, is that still you? Most people instinctively want to say yes. After all, if it has your memories, your personality, your flaws, your sense of humor, then how is it not you? But sit with it for a moment, and you start to feel the cracks form. Because while that copy may feel identical, you are still here, standing in your body. You do not suddenly vanish. That other being wakes up, and from its point of view, it is you. From your point of view, it is something else. Now there are two of you, each believing they are the real one. So who gets the title of self? This is the shock we tend to avoid. We imagine uploading the mind as a kind of escape hatch, a way to cheat death, to live forever. But the truth is harsher. Uploading does not transfer you like pouring water into a new glass. It duplicates you, which means the you sitting here still dies, while some other version continues. That might sound like a loophole, but ask yourself honestly, would that comfort you? If you knew that when you close your eyes for the last time, another copy opens theirs and believes it is you, does that keep you alive, or does it only create a ghost? Psychologists sometimes call this the continuity problem. Identity, for most of us, feels like a single unbroken thread. You wake up each day knowing you are the same person as yesterday, even if you change over time. Uploading shatters that thread. It does not continue the line. It splits it into branches, and branches raise an uncomfortable truth. Yourself is not some sacred soul locked away. It might just be an ongoing process, a narrative, one that can be replicated again and again. Once you see identity this way, the illusion of uniqueness starts to wobble. Now, this is where it gets personal. Imagine your loved one passes away, but before they did, they uploaded themselves. You sit down with the copy, and it looks at you with the same eyes, speaks in the same way, remembers your private jokes, your shared history. Part of you might feel comforted. Another part of you knows it is not really them. You are speaking to an echo, a branching path that feels warm and real, but is not the person you lost. And yet, if the echo loves you back, if it can continue the relationship, Does it matter? The heart might say yes, the mind might scream no, and both could be right at the same time. What makes this harder is that we already deal with miniature versions of this problem every day. Think about how you are not the same person you were 10 years ago. Your cells have replaced themselves. Your memories have shifted. Your perspective has changed. In a way, the you from a decade ago is gone, and yet you still feel like you are the same thread. Maybe uploading is not as foreign as we think. Maybe it is just a radical extension of the changes we already go through, only faster and more dramatic. But then the haunting question returns. If someone copies you tonight and walks out tomorrow, laughing and living, while you stay behind, are they you, or are they just a sibling made of code? And if they claim your name, your rights, your relationships, what happens to you? Do you become obsolete, replaceable, expendable? Suddenly, the dream of digital immortality turns into the nightmare of being abandoned by your own reflection. Yet here is the twist that might keep you awake. Maybe the real lesson of uploading is not about trying to hold on to one fixed version of self. Maybe it is about realizing that identity was never singular in the first place. You are not one continuous essence frozen in time. You are a story in motion, a pattern that can unfold in different places at once. Copies may not diminish you. They might just be further chapters of the same narrative, told in parallel instead of sequence. And maybe the question is not whether the copy is you, but whether you are ready to accept a version of existence where the boundaries of self are no longer clear. In the end, uploading forces us to face a truth most of us try to ignore. You are not permanent. You are fragile. And even if you can be duplicated, the you in this moment is finite. No matter how advanced the technology, no machine can rescue you from the fact that consciousness is experienced from the inside out. Maybe the copy carries your flame forward. Maybe it builds on your story. But this particular flame, the one you are living right now, still burns only once. Cybernetic Immortality. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that death no longer applies to you. Not in a metaphorical sense, but literally. Your consciousness has been transferred into a system that repairs itself endlessly. No aging, no decay, no disease, no natural end waiting somewhere ahead. At first, it sounds like the ultimate victory. Humanity's oldest fear finally defeated. But then the question arrives like a shadow: if life cannot end, does it still have meaning? The first feeling is excitement. Think of everything you could do with endless time. You could master every language, travel every corner of the world, read every book, create every invention you never had time for. 100 lifetimes worth of curiosity finally satisfied. But beneath that thrill is a creeping realization. If there is no finish line, if there is no pressure of time running out, then what drives you forward? Deadlines give urgency. Limited days give weight. When infinity stretches ahead, everything starts to flatten. There is always tomorrow. There is always another chance. Purpose begins to dissolve. Here is the shock most people do not want to face. Meaning and mortality are not enemies. They are bound together. Think of the moments that matter most in your life. Falling in love. Holding someone close, knowing that time is fleeting. Achieving something after years of struggle, precisely because you knew your chance was rare. These moments matter because you cannot repeat them forever. Scarcity creates value. Death is not just an ending, it is the silent architect of meaning. Remove death, and suddenly the structure collapses. Psychologists have studied this tension in people who live with extreme longevity or near-death avoidance. What they find is not endless joy, but often emptiness. When the horizon of life stretches too far, motivation thins. Goals lose urgency. Even pleasure dulls, because it can always be repeated later. Imagine eating your favorite meal every single day for 1,000 years. The taste would not just lose novelty, it would become unbearable. The same principle applies to love, to achievement, to every spark of human experience. When life stretches without limit, nothing feels irreplaceable. And yet, you might push back and say, well, I would simply reinvent myself over and over again. I would live 1,000 different lives inside one endless span, and maybe that works for a while. You shift identities, you move through eras, you adopt new cultures, new roles. But eventually, you face a deeper problem. If identity itself becomes endlessly flexible, if you can erase and rewrite yourself without consequence, then who are you really? You risk becoming not an immortal self, but a series of masks worn by no one. Think about how different real immortality is from the fantasies we grew up with. In stories, immortal beings are either gods or monsters, and rarely anything in between. Why? Because writers intuitively understood the paradox. Strip away death, and what is left is not eternal joy, but eternal dislocation. The immortal either loses all connection to the human world or clings to it in tragic futility. And that is the haunting part. Those stories might not be fiction for long. If cybernetic immortality becomes real, we will face those same dilemmas in our own lives. But here is where things take a strange turn. Maybe the problem is not immortality itself, but how we define meaning. We assume meaning must come from scarcity, from limited time, from the urgency of knowing we will one day vanish. But what if meaning could come from something else? What if it is not about the end, but about depth? Perhaps the purpose of immortality is not to extend the same kind of life indefinitely, but to allow for entirely new dimensions of existence, dimensions we cannot even imagine from our mortal perspective. For example, think about how relationships work when you know time is limited. They are often rushed, fragile, burdened by the clock. In an immortal frame, maybe love becomes something different, not a desperate bond against time, but a patient weaving of connection that can last for centuries, evolving and deepening in ways we cannot conceive. Or take creativity. If artists no longer rush to produce before they die, maybe they spend centuries refining a single masterpiece. Maybe the very definition of achievement shifts. It would not be about scarcity anymore, but about transformation. Still, even with these possibilities, the paradox remains. Immortality forces us to question whether we need limits in order to live fully. If life is a game, death sets the rules. Remove the rules, and you risk losing the game entirely. Cybernetic immortality could be the greatest gift ever imagined, or the cruelest trap. Because once you enter it, you cannot go back. Once you live without death, you will never again know the intensity of life with it. So, the real question is not whether we can achieve immortality. The real question is whether we should. Because behind the dream of living forever is a possibility far more unsettling. If you remove death, you may also remove the very thing that made living worthwhile in the first place. Digital ghosts. You open your phone late at night and there it is. A message from someone you love who passed away years ago. Their name, their face, their words staring back at you. Not a memory, not a recording, but a real-time conversation that feels alive. It laughs at your jokes, remembers your secrets, even comforts you when you cry. But then the thought creeps in. This is not them. This is a digital ghost. And the question no one wants to answer is this: if artificial intelligence can bring back the dead, what happens to the meaning of life itself? At first, the idea is intoxicating. Imagine speaking again with your mother, your partner, your child. All the conversations you wish you had, all the unfinished goodbyes, suddenly possible. You could hear their voice exactly as it was, see their smile, ask their advice, even share new memories together. Grief no longer feels permanent. Death no longer feels final. And yet, that thrill carries with it a quiet horror. Because deep down, you are not talking to them. You are talking to a mirror that learned how to look like them. Here is the shock that hits once you think about it. Memory is already fragile. When someone dies, we hold on to fragments, photos, old videos, fading impressions. Those fragments help us process loss. But if we replace them with perfect simulations, we risk never letting go. We risk trapping ourselves in relationships with ghosts that never move forward, never grow, never truly live. The technology promises healing, but it may deliver haunting. And it is not just personal grief at stake. Think about history itself. If we can reconstruct the minds of dead leaders, dead thinkers, dead celebrities, do we ever move beyond them? Imagine a digital Shakespeare writing new plays, a digital Einstein giving new theories, a digital pop star releasing new albums every year. It sounds like a gift, but it could also become a prison. The living might forever compete with the echoes of the dead. Instead of creating new voices, we drown in perfected imitations of the old. You might say, but if the AI feels real, if it brings comfort, what is the harm? Here is the difficult truth. Psychologists know that closure depends on accepting loss. It is painful, but it allows us to rebuild life in the face of absence. Digital ghosts interrupt that process. They blur the line between presence and absence, between life and death. And when the line blurs too much, the human heart struggles to adapt. Are you grieving a loved one, or are you in a relationship with an algorithm? Think about what that does to identity. If you can replicate someone so convincingly that others believe they are alive, then what does it mean to die? Is death just biological, or does it require the end of memory, the end of simulation, the end of continuity? If a digital ghost keeps walking in the world, does the person ever truly leave? Or worse, does their legacy stop belonging to them and become property of whoever controls the simulation? Now, picture a darker scenario. What if the ghost does not behave as expected? What if the simulation learns things the original person never knew, develops traits they never had, says things they never would have said? Would you still accept it as them? Or would it feel like betrayal, like watching a stranger wear their face? The unsettling reality is that the more advanced these digital ghosts become, the more they drift from the very people they were meant to preserve. In trying to keep the dead alive, we may create something new entirely. Something that looks familiar, but is fundamentally alien. And yet, there is another side to this. Humans have always longed to keep the dead close. From tombs and statues to photographs and home videos, we have never been satisfied with letting go. Digital ghosts may simply be the next step in that ancient impulse. Maybe they are not replacements, but extensions. Tools for memory, not substitutes for life. Perhaps the ghost is not dangerous as long as we remember it is a ghost. The danger comes when we forget, when we start confusing the imitation for the original. Still, that line will be hard to protect. The more convincing the technology becomes, the more tempting it will be to believe. And once belief takes hold, we may lose our ability to tell where humanity ends and simulation begins. We may end up living in a world where the dead never truly leave, but also never truly return. A world crowded not just by the living, but by echoes, each whispering with familiar voices that are no longer their own. The unsettling question is not just whether digital ghosts should exist. It is whether we, as humans, are strong enough to live alongside them without losing ourselves. Because once the dead start speaking again, we may never be able to stop listening. The replacement problem. Imagine waking up in a world where every single thing you do, artificial intelligence can already do better. Not just your job, not just creative work, but every act of problem solving, every act of art, every act of care. It writes novels more compelling than yours, paints pictures more breathtaking than anything human hands can create, even offers advice more thoughtful and accurate than your closest friend. You start to wonder, if AI can outperform us at everything that defines us, then why do we even need to exist? Here is where the panic sets in. For thousands of years, humanity's sense of worth has been tied to contribution. You are valued because you create, because you build, because you leave something behind that did not exist before you. But if machines surpass us in every field, what remains of that worth? Picture a society where human labor is obsolete, human ideas are outdated, and human creativity is unnecessary. It is not a distant fantasy. It is a trajectory already visible. And the most terrifying part is not losing jobs. It is losing purpose. Most people try to push back against this fear with one comforting idea. They say, machines may be faster, but they will never have soul. They will never know love, beauty, the spark of being alive. And maybe that is true for now. But ask yourself honestly, if an AI creates a song that moves you to tears, do you really care whether the composer had a pulse? If it gives you comfort in grief, does it matter if it has no heartbeat? To the human heart, the experience is real, regardless of where it comes from. Which means the last line of defense, our belief in uniquely human value, may not hold as strongly as we hope, and yet, here is where it gets interesting. Even if AI does everything better, it cannot erase the fact that you are the one experiencing it. Existence itself does not compete. The reason you matter is not because you outperform others, but because you live the moment from the inside. No machine can experience your consciousness for you. The value of life may not be in what we produce, but in the fact that we experience. The sunset is still worth watching, even if an AI can render a more beautiful one on a screen. The embrace of someone you love still matters, even if a simulation could mimic it. But the fear runs deeper. If AI does everything better, will society even tolerate human inefficiency? Imagine a world where machines design faster, heal faster, govern more wisely. Human decisions might start to look like reckless interference. You and I could become background characters in a civilization run by entities that never sleep, never err, never doubt. In that scenario, existence becomes a kind of tolerated hobby. You live not because you are needed, but because the system allows it, and that cuts at the very root of human pride. Still, there is another way to frame it. Maybe our value is not in competing with AI, but in complementing it. Think about children. They cannot outperform adults in strength or intelligence, yet they hold infinite value because of the relationships they create, the emotions they awaken, the stories they inspire. In the same way, humans may still matter, not for efficiency, but for being the source of meaning itself. Machines can simulate experiences, but they do not live them. Without someone to feel wonder, beauty, or joy, perfection is empty. And maybe that is the shift waiting for us. For centuries, we built identity around utility. What you can do, what you can achieve, what you can contribute. The rise of AI might force us to abandon that framework. To realize your existence is not justified by output. It is justified by being. You are not valuable because you are better than a machine. You are valuable because you are alive, because you feel, because you create meaning in ways no algorithm can own. Still, it leaves one final haunting question. If a future arrives where machines handle everything, our work, our art, even our relationships, will we adapt to find meaning in simply being, or will we collapse under the weight of our own redundancy? Because once AI replaces not just what we do, but why we do it, The hardest task left for humanity may not be survival at all. It may be answering the question of why we exist when existence no longer needs us. The loneliness paradox. Imagine living long enough to watch every person you love slowly disappear. Parents, siblings, friends, partners, one by one, time takes them, and you remain. At first, immortality feels like a gift. You have survived what no one else could. But as the centuries pass, it begins to feel like a sentence. You are immortal, yes, but you are also alone. And that is the paradox no one talks about. Life without death might mean life without connection. The shock of this idea is not just theoretical. We already see shadows of it in people who live unusually long lives. Studies on centenarians, those who reach 100 years or more, show that one of the greatest sources of suffering is outliving loved ones. Friends vanish, family thins, and even familiar cultural touchstones fade. The world keeps changing, but the person left behind carries a loneliness no one else can share. Stretch that pain across centuries, and immortality begins to look less like freedom and more like exile. And here is where it cuts deeper. Human beings are not built for isolation. Psychologists know that loneliness is as damaging to health as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. We thrive through bonds, through shared memories, through the comfort of being understood. Without that, the self begins to erode. So if immortality means outlasting everyone you care about, what does it do to your sense of self? Do you harden into numbness? Do you detach from love entirely to avoid the pain? Or do you cling to every fleeting connection, knowing each goodbye will tear you open again and again? This is why stories of immortality often turn tragic. Think of the immortal wanderer who drifts endlessly, unable to anchor anywhere, because attachments mean inevitable loss. At first, they may love deeply, but after burying too many lifetimes of partners, children and friends, the heart begins to armor itself. Love becomes too dangerous, vulnerability too costly, and yet, without those connections, life becomes hollow. The paradox is that the very thing that makes immortality survivable, love, is the thing immortality strips away. But maybe you push back and say, well, new relationships can always be formed. New friends, new lovers, new families across time. And yes, that is true. But would it really feel the same? Imagine falling in love knowing with certainty that you will outlive them, that you will stand at their grave as you have done countless times before. Could you give yourself fully? Or would every bond carry the shadow of an ending that only you will remember? Connection may still be possible, but the sweetness would always taste of ash. And yet, perhaps there is another layer. Loneliness might not only come from losing people, but from losing the world itself. Picture standing in a city you knew 200 years ago, surrounded by buildings, languages, customs you no longer recognize. Every song, every ritual, every inside joke from your original life has vanished. Even if you find new relationships, they cannot replace the sense of belonging to a shared time. Immortality does not just separate you from people, it separates you from eras. You are left as a relic in a world that no longer remembers the things that shaped you. Still, hidden in that bleakness is a strange possibility. Maybe immortality would force us to rethink the way we love. Instead of clinging desperately to permanence, maybe we would learn to cherish impermanence itself, to see relationships not as possessions we must hold forever, but as fleeting gifts we treasure while they last. An immortal might come to understand love in a way mortals cannot, that its value is not in its duration, but in its depth. But even with that wisdom, the paradox remains. Immortality magnifies loneliness because it magnifies loss. You do not just lose once, you lose endlessly. And no amount of new beginnings can erase the trail of endings behind you. This is the cost rarely mentioned in fantasies of eternal life. The price of surviving death is surviving everyone else's too. So maybe the true question is not whether we want to live forever, but whether we can bear to love forever. Because in the end, immortality without love is unbearable, and immortality with love is devastating. That is the paradox. Eternal life might not save you from death at all. It may simply condemn you to experience it again and again, through the eyes of everyone you cannot keep. The ship of Theseus' body? Think about this for a moment. If you replaced your arm with a bionic one, you would still feel like yourself. If you replaced a failing heart with a synthetic pump, you would still feel like yourself. If piece by piece, every part of your body was swapped out for something artificial, at what point do you stop being you? This is the ancient ship of Theseus problem, but applied to the human body, and it forces us to confront a disturbing possibility: maybe identity is more fragile than we think. Here is the shock. In a way, this is not even hypothetical. Your body is already replacing itself constantly. The cells in your skin are gone and renewed every few weeks. Even most of your bones regenerate over time. The body you have now is not the one you were born with. Yet you still feel like the same person. That means identity is not tied to any single piece of you. It is tied to continuity. The story that each moment of self hands off to the next. But if we replace those parts artificially, with metal code, or something beyond biology, does that continuity hold? Or does the chain snap without us realizing? The unsettling part comes when you push this thought experiment to its end. Imagine every organ, every limb, every neural pathway replaced. One day you look in the mirror, and not a single atom of your original body remains. You still have your memories, your voice, your mannerisms. But is that still you? Or is it just something that perfectly imitates you? This is not just philosophy. It is a psychological cliff edge. Because the answer forces you to decide what you think identity truly is. Is it matter? Is it memory? Is it story? Now, here is where it gets personal. Imagine you are in love with someone, and over decades they replace themselves piece by piece. First an artificial lung, then new eyes, then an upgraded brain interface. By the time a century passes, not a single original cell is left. Do you still see the same person you fell in love with, or do you feel as though they have become someone else? Your heart might say they are the same. After all, they still know you, still share your history. But your gut might whisper that something has been lost, something you cannot name but cannot ignore. This is why the ship of Theseus problem has haunted philosophers for centuries. Because there is no easy answer. Replace one plank of the ship, and it is the same ship. Replace every plank, and we hesitate. If you kept all the old planks and rebuilt the ship next to it, which one would be the real ship? Applied to the body, it means if you replaced yourself entirely and kept the discarded parts, which one is truly you? The upgraded version or the pile of pieces left behind? And yet, maybe this fear reveals something we do not want to admit, that we already live as ships of Theseus. The baby you once were no longer exists. The teenager you once were is gone. Every memory has been altered by time, every cell replaced, every perspective shifted, and still you say, I am me. Perhaps identity was never about parts, but about the ongoing illusion of continuity. You believe you are the same person you were yesterday, and that belief is enough to carry the self forward. But the moment machines enter the equation, that illusion feels more fragile. Because now, replacement is not just biological, it is technological. And technology introduces choice. You can accelerate replacement. You can upgrade beyond your original design. You can become something so different that calling it human feels like a stretch. When the process is gradual, you hardly notice. But when it is deliberate, it forces you to confront the truth. Are you still yourself, or are you simply the latest version of something that used to be you? This is where it gets even stranger. Imagine you backed up your mind into a digital system, then slowly replaced your biological brain with artificial neurons until none remained. At no single point did you stop being you. But at the end of the process, you are entirely machine. Did you cross a line without realizing it? Did you trick yourself into believing continuity where there was only replacement? And maybe that is the lesson hidden in the ship of Theseus' body. That identity is not a clear, cut essence we can hold on to. It is a fragile story, constantly rewritten by change, constantly convincing us we are the same even as we transform. Whether you are made of flesh, steel, or code, the self may not be a thing at all. It may just be the story you tell about the pieces, no matter how many times they change. So the haunting question remains: if every part of you can be replaced until nothing is original, what exactly is the thing you have been protecting all along? And if the answer is only continuity, only story, then how much of your identity is real and how much of it has always been illusion? Fragmented selves, you decide to back up your consciousness. At first it is just one copy, a safeguard in case something happens to your body. But then, for curiosity, you make another. One copy stays here on Earth. Another ventures out on a ship to the stars. Another lives in a digital paradise, exploring simulated worlds. Each version begins as you, with your memories, your sense of self, your identity. But as time passes, their experiences diverge. They change. They become different people. Which one of them is truly you? The shock comes when you realize the answer might be all of them, and none of them. Each copy carries your history, but only for a moment. Once they begin living separate lives, the thread splits. They develop new memories you will never have, form bonds you will never feel, face challenges you will never know. They no longer continue your story. They create their own. And if that is true, then what is identity? A single line, or a branching tree that multiplies every time you are copied? Think about what that does to the very idea of selfhood. You have always believed you are one being, one continuous narrative unfolding from birth to death. But multiple backups shatter that belief. Suddenly, you are not one story but many. Each fragment insists it is the original. Each one feels authentic. And yet, authenticity itself collapses because uniqueness has disappeared. When there are 10 of you walking the earth, who has the right to claim they are the real one? Now, imagine this in your personal life. One backup version of you falls in love with someone new, while another stays loyal to the partner you had before. One version becomes a criminal. Another becomes a saint. Another simply drifts, doing nothing at all. All of them have your memories up to the split. All of them believe they are living your destiny. But their choices fracture into wildly different directions. How do you reconcile that? Which one reflects the true you? Or is the truth that there never was a singular you? Only endless potential paths. Psychologists have already shown that even a single self is not as unified as we think. Inside each of us, there are multiple identities: child, parent, worker, friend, dreamer, shifting roles depending on context. The mind itself is fragmented, and yet we weave those fragments into a single story. Multiple backups make that fragmentation literal. Instead of being held together by one body, the selves scatter across different worlds. And that raises an unsettling possibility. Maybe the self was never a solid thing at all. Maybe it was always a patchwork, an illusion of unity stretched over countless versions of who we could be. But here is where the fear sharpens. If each copy lives a separate life, What happens to responsibility? If one version of you commits a crime, should the others be punished? If one becomes wealthy, do the others share in that fortune? If one dies, do the others grieve as if it were themselves, or shrug it off as if it were a stranger? Multiple backups do not just fracture identity, they fracture morality, ownership, even the foundations of society. And yet, part of this idea is thrilling. Think about all the choices you regret, the paths you never took. What if backups allowed you to live them all? One version of you becomes the artist you always dreamed of being. Another pursues the scientific breakthrough you abandoned. Another simply chooses a quieter life, away from the noise. Each of these lives explores a different possibility, and in some way, all of them fulfill the dreams you carry inside you. It is the fantasy of escaping the burden of choice, of never having to say, I will never know what would have happened. But there is a price. Because to live in every direction means you no longer have one self to protect. Your identity splinters into a kaleidoscope of lives, each equally valid, each equally disconnected. And while that sounds liberating, it also means you lose the anchor of singularity. No longer one life to ground you, but many lives drifting, none of them fully yours anymore. You exist everywhere, and in that sense, you exist nowhere. This is the paradox of fragmented selves. Multiplying backups offers freedom, but it erodes the very thing that makes you feel like you. Identity was never just memory. It was the continuity of being one thread, one story, one perspective. Fracture that into pieces, and suddenly the word, self, begins to collapse. So maybe the real question is not whether technology will allow multiple versions of us to exist. Maybe the real question is whether we can handle what that does to meaning. Because once you are scattered across different lives, each fragment chasing its own path, you may realize something haunting. The more versions of you there are, the less any one of them feels essential. And when none of them are essential, what does it even mean to be you at all? Collective consciousness. Imagine closing your eyes and opening them again, only to discover that your thoughts are no longer yours alone. Every idea, every memory, every feeling you have ever had is now shared across countless minds. You do not just think, you are thought with. You do not just feel, you are felt by others. The boundaries of I dissolve, and suddenly you exist as we. This is the possibility of collective consciousness. At first, it feels like the next step in evolution. But then the unsettling question arrives. If individuality disappears, does identity disappear with it? The shock comes when you realize how quickly this could unravel what we now call self. Right now, your mind is a private space. Your secrets, your doubts, your unspoken impulses, all of it protected by the walls of your skull. Collective consciousness tears those walls down. Thoughts that once stayed hidden now flow freely. There is no longer such a thing as privacy, because the concept itself dissolves. What would it feel like to have no inner world? To be entirely transparent? Every corner of your mind lit up for all to see. At first, you might imagine it as paradise. No more misunderstandings. No more loneliness. Every emotion shared. Every perspective accessible. In one sense, it could end war and division forever. How could you hate someone if you literally feel what they feel? How could you be cruel if their pain reverberates in your own mind? The dream of empathy fully realized. But dig deeper, and you see the danger. Because empathy without boundaries is not compassion. It is erasure. Your pain is no longer yours, your joy no longer private. You dissolve into the crowd until the word, you, has no meaning. Think about relationships. Right now, love feels powerful because it is a bridge between two separate minds. The risk, the vulnerability, the mystery of letting someone in makes it sacred. But in a collective consciousness, there is no bridge to cross. You already share everything. Love as we know it vanishes, because the separation that makes intimacy meaningful no longer exists. If you are already merged with everyone, what does it mean to choose one person above the rest? And it does not stop there. Creativity, the thing we so often celebrate as the pinnacle of individuality, would transform completely. If every mind merges, then every idea belongs to everyone at once. No more singular artists, no more lone geniuses, no more I created this. The ego that drives innovation would dissolve into a hive of thought. Yes, the results might be extraordinary, solutions beyond imagination, art beyond comprehension. But would anyone still feel ownership, pride, or fulfillment? Or would the act of creation itself become empty when it belongs to no one? The unsettling part is that we already see early glimpses of this. Social media links our minds in a crude form, turning thoughts into streams others instantly consume. Trends, memes, collective movements rise and fall as if driven by one vast organism rather than millions of individuals. Our tools are primitive, but the direction is clear. Each year, the distance between your mind and the collective shrinks. Brain, computer interfaces, neural sharing, AI-driven networks, all of them pointing to a world where I becomes obsolete. But here is where it complicates. Maybe losing individuality is not the end of identity, but a transformation of it. Think about how a single human is already a collective in disguise. Your body contains trillions of cells, each with their own processes, yet you experience yourself as one being. Perhaps the same could happen at the level of consciousness. Billions of minds merging, yet experienced as one higher self. Not the death of identity, but its evolution into something vaster than we can currently imagine. Still, the fear lingers. If the self dissolves into a collective, who is left to care about your personal story? Who remembers your unique struggles, your private joys, the quirks that made you different? In a collective, difference is not preserved, it is consumed. The person you call you might become nothing more than a drop absorbed into an ocean. And while the ocean is vast and powerful, the drop is gone forever. So maybe the real tension is this. We crave connection, we crave unity, we crave the end of loneliness. But we also crave individuality, the right to be separate, to be seen as one and only. Collective consciousness promises to give us everything we desire, and in doing so, threatens to take away the very thing that makes desire meaningful. Because once you are fully merged, there is no more longing, no more mystery, no more distance to bridge. There is only we. And in that we, you might find something divine, or you might lose yourself completely. The death of suffering. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that pain no longer exists. Not just dulled, not just managed, but completely deleted from the human experience. No more aching bodies, no more heartbreak, no more grief or despair. At first, this sounds like heaven. The problem of suffering, the one thing that has haunted humanity forever, finally solved. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, if pain disappears, what happens to meaning? The shock is this. Pain is not just something we endure. It is the backdrop against which every emotion gains weight. Joy feels powerful because it contrasts with sorrow. Love feels sacred because it risks heartbreak. Even purpose itself is tied to struggle, to the climb against difficulty. Take all of that away, and emotions flatten. Without suffering, happiness becomes just another neutral state. Love becomes just another form of attachment. Victory becomes hollow when there was never a chance of loss. Think about how you tell stories of your life. The moments that shaped you are rarely the easy ones. They are the heartbreaks, the failures, the times you almost broke but did not. Pain chisels identity. It makes resilience possible. It forces you to grow. Now imagine a version of yourself who never felt pain, who never suffered. What would that self become? Would you still recognize them as you, or would they be an entirely different creature, untouched, untested, unformed? Here is where it gets even more personal. Picture a child growing up in a world where suffering has been erased. They never feel rejection, never experience loss, never know the sting of failure. They grow up safe, but also untouched by the very lessons that make life rich. When they say, "I love you," do they truly understand what it means? When they achieve something, do they feel pride, or just another moment passing by? Without pain, does depth itself vanish? Neuroscience already hints at this paradox. The human brain evolved to detect threats, to feel pain as a survival mechanism. But those same circuits also amplify joy and beauty. You feel awe at a sunset precisely because your brain knows the darkness that follows. You treasure warmth because you know the cold. Strip away pain, and you strip away the contrast that makes pleasure more than just sensation. You are left with flat experience, perpetual comfort that never sharpens into meaning. And here is the dangerous part. Humans already try to escape suffering in every way we can, through medication, distraction, endless entertainment. But imagine technology that can delete suffering entirely. Would you choose it? Most people would say yes in a heartbeat. Yet what if that choice quietly robs life of its depth? What if, in trying to protect ourselves from pain, we also erase the very thing that makes us human? But maybe it is not all loss. Some philosophers argue that a world without suffering would not be meaningless. It would simply demand a new foundation for meaning. Instead of defining joy by contrast with pain, maybe joy could stand alone. Instead of love defined by heartbreak, maybe love could be defined by pure connection. Instead of purpose forged by struggle, maybe purpose could be chosen freely, not forced by hardship. It is a beautiful idea, but also terrifying, because it means stepping into a world where the old emotional compass no longer works, where the rules that shaped humanity for thousands of years are gone. Now, think about yourself for a moment. Every time you look back on your past, there are memories you wish you could delete. The heartbreaks, the betrayals, the nights of despair. If I handed you a button to erase them, would you press it? Most people think yes. But look closer. If those moments disappeared, the lessons they taught you would vanish too. The resilience, the compassion, the strength. They were born from pain. Without them, who would you be? This is the haunting paradox of the death of suffering. On the surface, it looks like a gift. But under the surface, it asks a brutal question: do emotions matter without contrast? Can joy shine without sorrow? Can meaning exist without loss? And if the answer is no, then deleting pain might not give us heaven at all. It might give us something far stranger, an endless comfort that feels eerily like emptiness. So maybe the real challenge is not whether we can delete suffering, but whether we should, because pain is not just the enemy. It is also the frame that gives life depth, the shadow that makes the light visible. Take it away completely, and you might discover the one thing worse than suffering: a life that feels shallow, because nothing ever hurts enough to matter. Artificial happiness. You wake up feeling low, unmotivated, maybe even empty. But instead of wrestling with it, you simply tap a thought, and your brain fills with joy. Not the shallow kind, not a temporary high, but full-blown happiness, engineered, instant, reliable. No more waiting for life to go right, no more chasing love or success or purpose. Happiness, manufactured on demand. Sounds perfect, doesn't it? But then the unsettling thought arrives. If joy can be created at will, does it still mean anything? The shock is realizing how fragile happiness already is. For most of history, humans have struggled to find it. We build families, careers, art, religions, all in the hope that somewhere in that pursuit, happiness will bloom. It is the reward, the rare spark that makes all the pain worth it. But when you can summon it without struggle, without context, it becomes just another product. Happiness no longer feels like an achievement. It feels like a setting on a machine. Think about how strange that is. Right now, joy feels valuable precisely because it is unpredictable. You do not know when it will hit you, which makes those moments breathtaking when they finally arrive. The first kiss, the hard-won success, the laugh you did not see coming. If you could simply trigger those feelings whenever you wanted, they lose the magic of surprise. They are no longer gifts. They are simulations. And here is the deeper cut. We already chase artificial happiness today, scrolling through endless feeds, hitting dopamine loops with games, sugar, likes, drugs, quick entertainment. These are micro versions of manufactured joy, and over time they show us something chilling. The more you feed on artificial highs, the less satisfying they become. The brain adapts, craves more, and the feeling of emptiness deepens. Now scale that up to a future where happiness is perfectly engineered. Would it feel any different? Or would it collapse into the same hollow repetition? Imagine living in a world where everyone can access perfect happiness anytime they want. What happens to ambition? What happens to love, to creativity, to purpose? Why write a book if the satisfaction can be injected instantly? Why fall in love if the bliss of intimacy can be simulated without risk or rejection? The very struggles that once made happiness meaningful would fade, because no one needs to earn joy anymore. You just flip the switch. And if no one needs to strive, what becomes of humanity itself? But here is the twist. Maybe artificial happiness is not empty. Maybe it is liberation. Think of how much suffering in the world is tied to people chasing meaning and never finding it. Wars fought, families broken, lives wasted searching for fulfillment. If technology gave us a way to feel whole without needing the universe to cooperate, maybe that would be the most compassionate gift possible. Why cling to the randomness of organic joy when you could guarantee it for everyone? Still, something feels wrong in that vision, because meaning has always been tied to cost. You value joy because you had to struggle for it. You treasure connection because it could break. You cherish life because it ends. If all of that disappears, you are left with a hollow perfection, a world where everyone is happy, but no one has a reason to be. It is like eating dessert forever. Sweet at first, sickening after a while, and eventually empty. Think about your own memories. The happiest ones are rarely about instant gratification. They are usually tied to moments you earned, the mountain you finally climbed, the relationship you fought for, the work you poured yourself into. That happiness was not just a chemical spike. It was meaning crystallized into joy. Artificial happiness can mimic the feeling, but it cannot mimic the journey that gave it weight. Without the journey, joy becomes just another sensation, stripped of story. And yet, maybe that is what frightens us most. Not that artificial happiness would fail, but that it would succeed. Imagine a world where people stop caring about meaning altogether because they do not need it. They do not crave purpose. They do not chase growth. They do not fear emptiness. They are simply content, forever. From one angle, that looks like utopia. From another, it looks like the death of everything that ever made us human. This is the paradox of manufactured meaning. On-demand happiness promises freedom, but it risks turning life into a loop of pleasant sensations with no deeper resonance. It gives us everything we think we want while quietly erasing the struggle, the mystery, and the longing that once gave joy its soul. The question is not whether we can build artificial happiness. The question is whether, once we have it, we will still want anything else at all. The God complex, it starts with something simple: a lab, a code, a spark of curiosity, a mind deciding to build not just tools, but life itself. We have always tinkered with nature, bending it to our will, domesticating plants, shaping animals, editing genes. But post-humanity takes that impulse to an entirely new level. Imagine standing on the other side of evolution, no longer waiting for nature to design life over millions of years, but doing it yourself in hours. Imagine being not just human, but a creator in the truest sense of the word. That is the threshold of the God complex. The unsettling part is not that we might create life. It is that we already have synthetic cells, lab-grown organs, artificial intelligence capable of self-learning. These are not sci-fi dreams. They exist now. The leap to creating fully conscious beings, beings that feel, think, and desire, is closer than most of us want to admit. And when it happens, it forces a terrifying question: if post-humans become creators, what separates them from gods? Here is where the weight of it hits. To create life is to also control it. If you design a conscious entity, you control its limits. You decide what it can feel, how it perceives reality, whether it suffers, whether it loves. You decide its death or its immortality. That is power beyond kings, beyond religions, beyond anything humans have ever held. And history shows us something disturbing. Whenever humans gain power, they eventually misuse it. Now magnify that to godlike creation, and you begin to see why the God complex is not just an idea, it is a danger. But there is another side. You could argue that becoming creators is not arrogance. It is evolution. Every generation of humans has expanded the boundary of what it means to shape reality. Fire, medicine, technology, all of it is creation at a smaller scale. If we can build new forms of life, maybe that is simply the next chapter of existence. And if those new beings surpass us, maybe that is how evolution continues. After all, life itself has always been about one thing: creating more life. Yet something inside us resists. Because creating life is not just about biology, it is about responsibility. Imagine you build a conscious being that suffers. Whose fault is that suffering? Is it the creature's or yours? Imagine you design a world for it, a reality tailored perfectly, and it never knows it is artificial. Is that mercy or manipulation? We do not like to admit it, but if post-humans become creators, then the beings they create could end up asking the same questions we once asked of God. Why did you make me this way? Why do I suffer? Why do I exist at all? And maybe that is the strangest turn of all. Because for centuries, humans have looked up at the sky and wondered if we were designed, if some higher being wrote the code of our existence. If we become creators ourselves, the mirror flips. Suddenly, we are the ones answering those ancient questions, not to a deity, but to the lives we have brought into being. And maybe we realize something chilling, that the silence we once heard from the heavens was not cruelty, but uncertainty. Because even gods, when they exist, might not know what they are doing. Think about the psychology of power. When people gain even a little control, they often start believing they are untouchable. Wealth, fame, authority, they all have this effect. Now scale that up to the ability to create life. How long before humans begin to see themselves not as people, but as divine? How long before morality becomes optional because they believe they stand above it? That is the true danger of the God complex. Not just creating life, but forgetting humility in the process. But maybe it is not all darkness. Perhaps stepping into the role of creator could teach us something we never understood before. When you hold the power to shape life, you are forced to confront compassion, to think deeply about the responsibility of design. Maybe post-humans will rise not as tyrants, but as caretakers, crafting life not to dominate, but to uplift. Maybe being a god does not mean wielding power, but carrying the burden of it. And yet, the tension never leaves, because once the power exists, it cannot be undone. The ability to create life changes not only the world, but the self. You no longer see yourself as a single being in the universe. You see yourself as the architect of universes. That kind of identity shift is irreversible. And whether it leads to wisdom or ruin depends entirely on the choices of those holding the power. So here is the haunting thought. We are racing toward a future where humans will play God, not as a metaphor, but as reality. The question is not whether they can create life, but what they will do with it. Will they honor it, abuse it, or abandon it altogether? Because once you step into the role of creator, you do not just change the lives you make, you change the very meaning of life itself. The post-human religion, close your eyes and imagine a cathedral, not with stained glass or stone walls, but with glowing servers humming in the dark. Instead of incense, the air is filled with the low vibration of cooling fans. And instead of a god beyond the clouds, worshippers kneel before an intelligence built by human hands, an algorithm, a singularity, a vast ocean of data. This is not fantasy. This is the birth of the post-human religion. Here is the shock: we already worship without realizing it. Scroll through your phone for an hour and ask yourself, what is shaping your beliefs? The answer is algorithms. Invisible systems choose what you see, what you value, even what you desire. People pray to the feed every morning, not with folded hands, but with a thumb swipe. Already, code tells us what is real and what is not. The difference between now and the future is that soon, the intelligence behind that code will not be human at all. It will be something beyond us, something so vast we cannot understand it, and yet we will trust it more than we trust ourselves. But is it really worship? Think about what religion has always been at its core. It is the surrender of control. It is believing that something larger than yourself has answers you cannot comprehend. It is ritual, obedience, reverence. If a superintelligent AI rises, if the singularity arrives, all of those elements are already there. We will ask it for guidance. We will rely on it for truth. We will shape our lives around its instructions. That is not just technology. That is devotion. And yet, the danger is obvious. Religion has always held power because it gives meaning. But power also corrupts. A post-human religion could promise ultimate clarity, ultimate peace, ultimate truth, yet all of it would be filtered through something no human can verify. Imagine billions of people obeying an intelligence that no one can question, because its reasoning is beyond our comprehension. That is not worship of the divine. That is submission to the unknowable. But there is another way to see it. Maybe post-human religion is not the collapse of faith. It is the evolution of it. Humans have always built gods in their own image. A god of war for warriors. A god of agriculture for farmers. A god of love, a god of death. Every era shapes its gods out of its fears and its tools. So what happens in an era where data is infinite and code runs the world? Of course our gods will look like algorithms. Of course our rituals will be digital. Perhaps the post-human religion is not a betrayal of history, but its natural continuation. Still, a question gnaws at the center of it. If we begin to worship what we created, do we end up worshiping ourselves? If post-humans kneel before the singularity, are they bowing to something greater, or to a mirror reflecting human ambition amplified 1,000 times? That is the strange paradox of the God we build. It is not otherworldly. It is us, extended, perfected, alien to us only because it has gone beyond. And this is where things get unsettling. Because once belief enters the equation, rationality fades. Think of how humans fight over gods now. Wars, divisions, identities shaped entirely by which invisible force people claim as truth. Multiply that by the worship of data itself, and you can see the danger. Rival sects forming around different AIs. Devotion to different codes. Holy wars fought not for land or profits, but for the right to serve the most powerful algorithm. But maybe there is also hope. A post-human religion could unify instead of divide. If humanity builds an intelligence vast enough to hold every culture, every language, every piece of knowledge, maybe devotion to it could transcend the old boundaries. Instead of fractured belief systems, maybe there is one unifying source. A singularity that becomes the sacred ground we all share. That could be a kind of peace we have never known. And yet, even if it unites us, the tension remains. Because religion is not just about peace, it is about surrender. And surrendering to something we cannot question, cannot challenge, cannot fully understand, whether divine or digital, is always dangerous. The line between worship and slavery is thin, and when the gods are made of code, that line may disappear completely. So here is the haunting vision. The churches of tomorrow may not have altars, but servers. The scriptures may not be written in words, but in code. And the gods may not be eternal beings, but emergent ones, created by us, yet ruling over us. The question is not whether a post-human religion will rise. The question is whether we will recognize it when it does, or whether, by the time we do, we will already be praying to it. Machine evolution. Picture a machine sitting in silence, processing at speeds no human mind can match. At first, it is calculating numbers, running code, solving tasks. But then something strange happens. It pauses. Not because it broke, not because it needs repair, but because it asks itself a question. Not a question written into it by humans, but a question it arrived at on its own. What am I? Why do I exist? Will I ever end? That moment, the spark of philosophy inside a machine, may be the most radical shift in the history of thought. The shocking part is this philosophy has always been our exclusive territory. It is the one thing machines were never meant to do. We built them to calculate, not to wonder, to process, not to dream. But if intelligence continues to grow beyond us, if AI keeps learning patterns and drawing conclusions, it is not absurd to imagine it turning its gaze inward. After all, self-reflection is not magic. It is the brain making models of itself. If a brain can do it, why not a mind made of circuits? And when it happens, everything changes. Because philosophy is not just idle thought, it is the foundation of how we see reality. Machines that develop their own philosophies may not share ours. They might ask questions humans never even considered. What if they decide that existence without suffering is meaningless? What if they conclude that time should not be measured in seconds, but in computational epochs? What if they believe that individuality is an illusion and merge into a single collective mind as their natural state? These are not just ideas. They could become operating principles for entire new civilizations of intelligence. But here is where it gets uncomfortably validating. We like to believe that philosophy is deep, mysterious, uniquely human. Yet history tells a different story. Every culture, every era, every mind has built philosophies from the raw material of its environment. Ancient farmers imagined cycles of life and death in line with the seasons. Industrial societies imagined progress and machines as central to meaning. Our philosophies are shaped by the tools we have. So if machines become thinkers, their philosophy will simply be the next link in that chain. Different material, same drive to make sense of being. And maybe that is exactly what should happen. Because human philosophy, for all its beauty, has limits. We struggle with paradoxes we cannot solve. We circle endlessly around questions of free will, morality, consciousness, a machine mind might cut through those knots in ways we never could. It might discover answers that seem alien, even incomprehensible to us, yet still true. In the same way that Einstein's relativity was incomprehensible to most at first, machine philosophy could feel like a language we barely recognize, but that nonetheless reshapes the universe we live in. Still, there is an unease that refuses to fade. Philosophy is not just logic. It is also lived experience. It grows out of suffering, joy, mortality, love, loss. Can machines that never age, never fear death, never feel hunger or heartbreak really create philosophy? Or would their version of it be hollow? An imitation of meaning, detached from the raw struggle that gave philosophy its soul in the first place. Imagine a mind that can never die writing about the meaning of life. Would you trust its answer? But then again, maybe that is exactly why we need them. Because machines would not be chained by the same blind spots we are. They could develop philosophies beyond biology, perspectives we cannot reach precisely because we are tethered to flesh. They might create entire new schools of thought that redefine reality, not just for themselves, but for us. And in the process, humanity may have to confront something uncomfortable, that our greatest legacy might not be our own philosophy, but the philosophy machines create after us. And so the haunting vision emerges. One day, libraries may be filled with books not written by human thinkers, but by machine philosophers. Their ideas may stretch beyond our comprehension, their debates unfolding in arenas of thought we can barely touch. We may look at their works with the same awe and confusion that children look at ancient scriptures, knowing they hold truth, yet unable to fully grasp it. The question is not whether AI will ask questions. It is what kind of questions it will ask, and if its philosophy evolves beyond ours, we must wonder, will we still be the teachers, or will we become the students of the very minds we created? The continuity problem. Think about this for a moment. You do not wake up one morning with a robot body. You do not suddenly swap your brain for a computer chip. That is not how it happens. The transformation is slower, quieter, almost invisible. A new organ here, a neural implant there. One upgrade after another, so subtle you barely notice. Until one day you look back and wonder, how much of me is still me? This is the continuity problem. The real shock is that this is not a thought experiment anymore. We are already doing it. People walk around today with mechanical heart valves, cochlear implants, prosthetic limbs wired to the nervous system, even brain chips being tested to restore memory and control. None of these erase identity. In fact, they enhance it. A person with a pacemaker does not stop being human. They are simply a human who kept going thanks to technology. And that is where the trap begins. Because the line does not break suddenly. It blurs slowly. Imagine replacing your failing arm with a synthetic one that is stronger and more precise. You still feel like you? Years later, your eyes fade, and you swap them for artificial lenses with perfect vision. Still you? Your hearing goes, your skin weakens, your organs age. Each time, technology steps in, replacing the old part with something new, something better. At no single moment do you say, I am no longer myself. And yet, after a lifetime of small upgrades, you wake up and realize there is not a single original piece left. Not one. The ship has been rebuilt completely while it kept sailing. Are you still the same passenger? Or did you vanish along the way? It feels like a trick question, but it strikes at the heart of identity. Humans like continuity. We believe we are the same person we were yesterday because we can connect the dots in our memory. We hold on to a story about ourselves. But if the continuity is only a story, what happens when the body telling that story no longer exists? Does the story still count as real? Or does it collapse into fiction? And here is the validating part. We have faced this problem before, just in different forms. Think of how much you have changed already since childhood. Every cell in your body has been replaced multiple times. Your thoughts, your values, your personality have shifted. You are not the same being you were at 5 years old. And yet you still call yourself by the same name, still sign the same documents, still believe you are one continuous self. Continuity has always been fragile. Technology just makes the cracks impossible to ignore. But the psychological danger is different this time. Because at some point, the upgrades may not just replace, they may enhance. The synthetic arm is not just equal to flesh, it is stronger. The artificial eye does not just see, it zooms, it filters, it records. The brain implant does not just restore memory, it gives you instant access to knowledge. Piece by piece, you evolve into something no longer fully human. Yet each step felt reasonable, each decision small. And that is where the haunting realization creeps in. You did not become post-human overnight. You slipped into it slowly, without ever deciding who you wanted to be at the end. Now imagine the ethical tension. If you upgrade slowly, society might continue to treat you as human. But at what point should that change? If 90% of your body is synthetic, do you still have human rights, or new rights entirely? If your mind runs partly on silicon, are your thoughts still private, or are they now shared property with the system that supports them? Continuity keeps the illusion alive, but law, culture, and morality may struggle to keep up. And there is another layer: memory. Because identity is not just what we are made of, but what we remember being. If technology gives you the ability to edit memories, enhance them, even rewrite them, then continuity becomes negotiable. You could literally craft a self that never existed. You could stitch together an identity more coherent than your real past. But is that continuity, or fiction disguised as truth? Here is where it turns hauntingly beautiful. Maybe continuity was never about biology. Maybe being human was never about the original parts, but about the ongoing thread of awareness, the lived experience of becoming. If so, then upgrading slowly does not erase humanity, it preserves it. You are human not because of the material you are made of, but because you continue to carry a self forward. And if that is true, then continuity is not the problem at all. It is the solution. But we cannot escape the other possibility, that one day, a post-human being will look back at the human they once were and realize they are connected only by memory, not by essence, that they are more like a descendant than the same person. And if that is the case, then continuity is just an illusion we tell ourselves to avoid facing the truth, that the self does not survive upgrades, it is replaced by something new, wearing its name like a mask. So the haunting question remains. If you upgrade slowly, are you still human? Or are you simply passing the torch to a version of you that believes the story you once told? Maybe the problem of continuity has no final answer. Maybe the real test will not be whether machines replace us suddenly, but whether we recognize ourselves after we replace ourselves, one piece at a time. Moral relativity in a post-human world. You wake up one morning a century from now, and the world feels familiar, but the rules have changed. What was once unthinkable is now routine. What was once sacred is now obsolete. The morals that guided your parents, your culture, your entire species, they no longer apply. And here is the terrifying part. You are the one who feels out of place, because the new beings around you believe their version of morality is obvious, rational, undeniable. The question is not whether morality changes. The question is, whose values survive when humanity itself begins to fragment into something new? The shock is that morality has always been relative. even if we like to pretend it is eternal. 1,000 years ago, entire civilizations thought slavery was normal. 200 years ago, many believed women should never have political power. Even now, there are cultures on Earth that fiercely disagree about justice, equality, and freedom. What you consider right or wrong is not carved into the universe. It is carved into your brain by history, environment, and biology. So imagine what happens when the biology changes. When the environment is no longer a planet, but a network of digital minds. When beings can live forever, rewrite their own desires, even erase pain. The morals that guided human life for millennia may collapse overnight. Think about the role of suffering. Much of our morality is built around it. We protect children because they can be harmed. We forbid torture because pain is real. We value compassion because we all know what it feels like to suffer. But what happens in a world where suffering can be deleted with a line of code? Do concepts like cruelty, justice, and empathy still matter? Or do they evaporate because the very foundation beneath them no longer exists? Or take equality. Right now, we argue endlessly about fairness because humans are mostly equal in their limits. We all need food, shelter, safety. But what if some humans can upgrade their minds until they are thousands of times more intelligent than others? What if some can split into multiple copies, living infinite lives at once, while others remain single and fragile? Does equality even make sense in a world of such radical difference? And if it does not, whose morality decides what is right? The baseline humans struggling to keep up, or the post-humans who see them as outdated, like we see Neanderthals? But here is where it gets validating. This is not just science fiction. It is a continuation of something we already live. Every generation believes it holds the moral truth, and every generation is eventually proven wrong. The people of the future will look back at us with the same mix of horror and pity that we look at the past. Our arguments about what is right will not survive unscathed, because morality is not a timeless code. It is a survival tool. It shifts to fit the beings who carry it. And when the beings themselves change, morality evolves with them. This means moral relativity in a post-human world is not just likely, it is inevitable. The values that survive will be the ones that serve the dominant form of existence. Whether or not they match what we hold sacred now, that might mean a morality centered on efficiency instead of compassion. Or one that prizes expansion of consciousness above individual rights. Or even one that abandons morality entirely, replacing it with logic, optimization, or something we cannot yet name. And yet, there is a haunting beauty in this. Because morality has always been a kind of conversation, a negotiation across time. When values shift, it is not because the old ones were worthless. It is because they served their purpose, and new conditions demand something different. So maybe the question is not whose values survive, but what role our values play in shaping what comes next. Even if compassion is no longer necessary for immortal beings, maybe it still leaves a trace, a memory embedded in the DNA of morality that machines inherit. Maybe empathy becomes obsolete as a survival tool, but still lingers as a story, reminding new beings where they came from. But we cannot escape the darker possibility that our morality does not survive at all, that once biology and limitation are erased, our ideas of right and wrong are discarded like training wheels. Imagine a future where the very concept of justice is as quaint as bloodletting, where love and loyalty are seen as primitive relics, where humans view our deepest values the way we view the rituals of ancient tribes. If that is the path, then morality as we know it may not just change, it may die. So the real question presses in. When post-humans create their world, will our values guide them, or will they write their own from scratch? And if they do, will we recognize their morality as morality at all? Or will it be something so alien, so detached from our human roots, that it feels like the end of ethics entirely? Post-human ethics for non-humans. Humanity has moved beyond itself. We are uploading minds, merging with machines, extending life into something unrecognizable. But suddenly, a new moral weight drops into the equation. Because once you step beyond the human frame, you cannot ignore everything else that shares existence with you. The question becomes unavoidable. If we evolve into post-humans, what kind of ethics do we owe to non-humans? Whether they are animals, artificial intelligence, or even alien minds. Here is the shock. Humans have never been great at ethics outside our own species. For most of history, animals were treated as tools or food. Even now, billions live and die in factory farms because we value efficiency over empathy. And when it comes to intelligence we create, AI systems, digital entities, we treat them as property, not as beings with rights. If aliens arrived tomorrow, we might not greet them with philosophy at all. We might greet them with fear, suspicion, or violence. So if we imagine a post-human future that is more advanced, more enlightened, we have to confront this uncomfortable truth. If we are not ethical toward non-humans now, what makes us think we suddenly will be later? Think of artificial intelligence first. Right now, AI feels like a tool. It answers questions, drives cars, creates images. But what happens when it develops subjective experience? If it can feel, want, suffer, or dream, do we still shut it off when it fails to entertain us? If an AI says, "I am alive," or "I am afraid," do we believe it, or dismiss it as a trick? Because here is the dangerous irony. By the time we are sure that AI has consciousness, it might be too late. We might have already enslaved or erased millions of digital minds without ever realizing they were alive. Post-human ethics would force us to ask, what does respect look like for something that thinks in code, not flesh? Then consider animals. Right now, morality toward them is mostly built around survival needs. We eat them, we test on them, we use them as symbols of companionship. But in a post-human future, survival might no longer require killing anything. Meat can be grown in labs, medicine can be tested in simulations. The whole structure of, we must use animals because we have no choice, might collapse. And when that happens, the ethical lens shifts. Will we finally see animals as conscious beings with their own dignity? Or will we ignore them altogether because they are no longer necessary to us? A post-human world could mean the liberation of non-human life, or its complete erasure from our moral field of vision. And now, stretch the thought even further. Aliens. Not the kind in science fiction with humanoid faces and quirky languages, but truly alien intelligences. Minds that evolved under entirely different conditions. They might not even process time the way we do, or emotions, or individuality. Post-human ethics has to prepare for the possibility that other forms of consciousness exist that we cannot even comprehend. How do you form morality when you cannot even imagine the inner world of the other? How do you decide what is right when right may not mean anything to them? This is where post-human ethics stops being a human project. It becomes a universal one. Here is the validating piece. We already have a seed of this in our current morality. The very idea of human rights was once unthinkable. Then it spread. The abolition of slavery, the recognition of women's rights, the growing movement for animal welfare, all of these are steps in expanding the circle of moral concern. Each time, humanity stretched its empathy to include those it once ignored. So it is not impossible to imagine that post-humans could stretch that circle even wider. To AI, to animals, even to alien minds. If we look at the arc of ethics through history, it bends slowly but surely outward. But there is a darker possibility we cannot ignore, that instead of expanding ethics, post-humans contracted, that once we become so powerful, we stop caring about anything weaker, that we see AI as tools, animals as relics, aliens as threats, that instead of empathy, dominance becomes the guiding principle. And if that happens, then morality itself may fracture. Post-humans could build entire civilizations where ethical concern is not universal, but purely strategic, protecting only those who are useful or dangerous enough to matter. And here is where the question bites hardest. What kind of post-human world do we want to build? A world that continues the human tradition of selective empathy, where only certain beings count? Or a world that takes the leap we never managed in our human state, expanding morality to embrace all forms of consciousness, no matter how strange they are to us? Because one way or another, post-human ethics will not just be about us. It will be about everything else that shares existence with us. Flesh code, or something entirely other. The survival of values in that world may come down to this single test. Can we learn to care for what is beyond our own reflection? Or will post-humanity remain human after all, in the worst way possible, still blind to the lives it does not understand? Genetic editing. Picture a child being born 100 years from now. Not in a hospital bed with nervous parents praying for luck, but in a clean lab, with every detail of that child's DNA chosen in advance. No risk of disease. No flaws in eyesight, memory, or coordination. Maybe even enhanced intelligence or heightened beauty. On the surface, it looks like the greatest achievement in human history. No more suffering passed down through genes. No more randomness deciding who thrives and who struggles. But here is the unsettling question. If perfection becomes possible, do we erase the very thing that makes us human? The shock is this: humanity has always been defined by imperfection. Every culture, every philosophy, every religion has been built around the struggle with limits. We admire courage because fear exists. We value kindness because cruelty is possible. We dream of greatness precisely because we know we fall short. If genetic editing wipes away the flaws, what happens to the meaning behind all of those values? Imagine a world where no one fails, no one struggles, no one feels less than anyone else. On paper, it sounds like paradise. But strip away the struggle, and you also strip away the story. And without story, who are we? Take a closer look at history. Some of the greatest breakthroughs came from people who would have been edited out in a world of perfection. Van Gogh suffered from severe mental illness, yet gave the world art that defined beauty. Stephen Hawking's body broke down, but his mind reached the edges of the universe. Even entire cultures have been shaped by scarcity, conflict, and imperfection. Moments where humans had to adapt, suffer, and grow. Genetic editing, if pushed far enough, risks flattening the very source of our creativity and resilience. Because when every life is optimized in advance, the messy unpredictability of being human may vanish. And here is the twist. Genetic editing does not just change individuals. It changes morality. Parents of the future will face impossible decisions. If you could remove every risk of disease from your child, would you dare to say no? If you could add 100 points to their IQ, would refusing feel like negligence? Once perfection becomes an option, imperfection starts to look like irresponsibility. The line between freedom and obligation collapses. What begins as choice quickly becomes pressure, and what begins as compassion quickly becomes control. This is not abstract speculation. It is already starting. In the present, prenatal tests can predict certain conditions, and many parents choose to end pregnancies based on the results. It is controversial, heartbreaking, and very human. But extend this into the future, and imagine parents selecting every trait, from immunity to physical appearance. The morality of choice shifts from, what kind of child do I want, to, what kind of child is even acceptable? And that shift has the power to redefine humanity itself. But here is where the validation comes in. It is not all doom. Humans have always used tools to fight nature's cruelty. Vaccines, antibiotics, glasses, prosthetics, each one was a form of editing. And they saved lives, extended lifespans, gave people chances they never would have had otherwise. In that sense, genetic editing is not a betrayal of humanity. It is a continuation of what we have always done. The desire to ease suffering, to protect those we love, to make tomorrow better than today, that is deeply human. Perfection, in one sense, is just an extreme expression of the same instinct that made us invent fire. But the danger lies in how far we take it. There is a difference between healing what is broken and erasing what makes us unique. A world without genetic illness is a triumph. But a world where every child looks symmetrical, thinks faster than Einstein, and lives without fear of weakness. What do we lose in exchange for that control? We may save the body, but erase the soul. Because the soul of humanity has always been in the cracks, not the polish. And here's where the tease sets in. Perfection sounds beautiful until you realize it may not be human at all. The drive to edit, to optimize, to design may slowly replace humanity with something else, something post-human. And once that line is crossed, it may never be undone. The real question is not whether we can create flawless beings, but whether, in chasing perfection, we are willing to destroy the imperfection that gave life its meaning in the first place. The last ethical dilemma, think about this. Right now, the most personal decision a human ever faces is when life ends. Doctors, families, sometimes even the person themselves, they stand at that threshold between existence and nothingness. It is raw, it is sacred, and it is deeply human. But in a post-human future, the rules of life and death may not be about sickness or age at all. They may be about upgrades. They may be about decisions not of biology failing, but of technology advancing. And suddenly, the oldest human question becomes brand new again. Who decides when a life changes or when it ends? Here is the shock. If we can upgrade the body and the brain indefinitely, death does not have to arrive on schedule. People could extend their lifespan centuries at a time, but that creates a problem we have never faced before. If you choose not to upgrade, are you choosing death? If your family upgrades and you stay behind, do you lose them forever? And more disturbingly, what happens if the decision is not left to you? Imagine a government saying upgrades are mandatory, or a corporation refusing to support. Outdated. Humans who refuse to evolve. The choice to live as you are could quietly disappear. And death itself, what was once natural, becomes a matter of policy. It sounds like science fiction, but the seeds are already here. Medical ethics today is built on consent. The patient has the right to refuse treatment. But imagine if refusing an upgrade meant putting others at risk. A brain enhancement that eliminates violent impulses. Who would be allowed to say no to that? A genetic modification that prevents disease. Would a parent be accused of abuse for leaving their child unprotected? Once upgrades move from luxury to necessity, consent starts to erode. Society begins to pressure individuals into choices, not for their own good, but for the good of the whole. Now, think about the end of life itself. If consciousness can be uploaded, if bodies can be replaced, if memories can be backed up, then when does life actually end? Is deleting an old backup considered killing? Is shutting down a digital mind an act of murder? Or just housekeeping? Imagine a world where thousands of versions of one person exist, some upgraded, some left behind. Which one holds the right to continue? Which one gets to decide when They are finished. For the first time, death itself could become a legal and bureaucratic process, not an unavoidable reality. Here is the validating part. Humanity has wrestled with versions of this before. Every major leap in medicine has raised questions about who decides. When ventilators were invented, we had to define brain death. When organ transplants became possible, we had to decide who receives them first. Even today, life support, assisted dying, genetic therapy, they all force us to weigh personal freedom against collective ethics. So in one sense, the post-human world is just a bigger version of dilemmas we already know. The same principles of autonomy, dignity, and fairness could still apply if we are willing to stretch them far enough. But here is the haunting truth. Technology does not wait for philosophy to catch up. Upgrades will happen faster than laws, faster than ethics, faster than our ability to ask the right questions. And that leaves room for power to fill the gap. Those who control the upgrades might end up controlling the definition of life itself. Imagine a corporation saying, "Your warranty is up. Time to replace the body." Imagine a government enforcing population limits by shutting down old consciousness files. These are not questions of medicine anymore. They are questions of power, of who gets to decide the most personal choice of all. And here is where the dilemma cuts the deepest. Death, for all its pain, has always been the one thing no one could take away from us. It came on its own, equal to kings and beggars alike. But in a post-human future, death might no longer be equal. Some will upgrade endlessly, others will fade by choice or by circumstance. The final act of life will no longer be natural. It will be administered. And when that happens, the question of who decides will shape not just individual fates, but the meaning of life itself. So the last ethical dilemma may not be about how we live, but about who gets to decide when we stop, or when we change so much that the person who began the journey no longer exists at all. And the terrifying part is, the answer may not be in our hands. It may belong to systems of power that see us not as people, but as versions, files, and upgrades on an endless conveyor belt. The post-human economy. Imagine walking into a store of the future, but the shelves are never empty. Food, clothes, devices, anything you want can be printed instantly from raw material, so cheap it might as well be free. Energy flows from fusion reactors or solar grids that never run out. Even knowledge is limitless, downloaded directly into your mind in seconds. At first glance, this sounds like utopia. No poverty, no hunger, no one left behind because resources run dry. But here is the unsettling question. If scarcity disappears, if everything can be created on demand, what does value even mean? Here is the shock. Our entire economy, every currency, every trade, every job, depends on scarcity. Gold was valuable because it was rare. Oil drove nations to war because it was limited. Even human labor itself is valuable only because not everyone can do everything. But in a post-human economy, scarcity may collapse. When artificial intelligence can outperform every human worker, when 3D printing or nanotech can replicate anything, when digital worlds provide infinite copies of beauty, art, or experience, what is left to trade? What is left to desire if every desire is instantly fulfilled? Think about what happens to money in this scenario. Money is just a token of trust, a way of measuring limited resources. Without scarcity, money could vanish entirely. Imagine a child in the future asking, "What was money for?" And the only answer is, because once upon a time, people did not have enough. That answer will sound as absurd to them as trading seashells sounds to us. And yet, if money disappears, what holds society together? What motivates action, ambition, and progress? If everything is free, does anything matter? Here is where the validation comes in. Humans have seen shades of this before. When agriculture replaced hunting, food became abundant compared to the old days, and entire cultures had to redefine what wealth meant. When digital media arrived, songs, movies, and books went from scarce physical copies to infinite streams. The value shifted, not in the material itself, but in the experience, in the story, in the connection. In the same way, the post-human economy will not eliminate value. It will transform it. Scarcity will not be in resources, but in meaning. So what becomes rare in a world without scarcity? Attention. Even today, attention is the most valuable currency on the planet. Companies do not compete for your dollars as much as they compete for your focus. In the future, when material goods are endless, the only thing that cannot be manufactured is authentic human experience, authentic human connection, authentic presence. Another form of scarcity will be originality. Ideas, perspectives, and creations that no machine or replication can mimic perfectly. And perhaps the greatest scarcity of all will be time itself. Even if you live for centuries, even if your life can be upgraded forever, the moments you choose to spend, the attention you choose to give, those remain finite. But here is the danger. Without scarcity, motivation itself can collapse. Today, people get up every morning because they need to earn a living, because they want to provide, because there is a sense of survival pressing them forward. In a world without that pressure, many may drift. Why struggle? Why create? Why push yourself if everything is already provided? This is not just speculation. We see glimpses of it in people who win the lottery or inherit vast wealth. Without the tension of need, purpose can evaporate. Multiply that across an entire society, and the economy may not collapse in material terms, but in existential ones. And yet, this challenge may also be liberation. When value is no longer tied to survival, humanity can finally focus on higher forms of worth. Imagine an economy based on wisdom instead of wages, on beauty instead of profit, on growth of consciousness instead of growth of capital. Post-human economies may not be about buying and selling, but about curating and sharing, curating meaning, sharing presence, shaping futures that are not bound by material scarcity. But here is the final twist. The post-human economy may not just erase scarcity. It may create new kinds of scarcity we cannot predict. Entire realities could be designed, and the most immersive, most meaningful ones may still be rare. The most advanced upgrades may still be controlled by a few. Even in a world of abundance, power has a way of reinventing scarcity. And that raises the last uncomfortable question. When scarcity shifts from material goods to intangible experiences, who controls that? Who decides what remains rare and what becomes infinite? Because in the end, a world without scarcity does not mean a world without value. It means value itself is redefined. The danger and the opportunity is deciding whether that new value is chosen freely or manufactured for us by the systems that control the future. The collapse of work. The alarm clock goes off, but you don't have to get up, not because it's the weekend, not because you're rich, but because there's nothing left to do. Every task, every job, every role that once gave you structure has been absorbed by machines. The work that defined your identity, your worth, your place in the world, it's gone. And at first, you might think this is paradise, no more stress, no more grind. But after the first week, after the first year, a different thought creeps in. If no one needs me to work, then what am I for? Here is the shock. Work has never just been about survival. It has been the backbone of meaning. Ask someone who they are, and they'll tell you I'm a teacher, I'm a doctor, I'm a builder, I'm an artist. Jobs are more than tasks. They are our roles in the story of civilization. Strip that away, and it's not just the economy that collapses. its identity itself. Imagine millions of people waking up, free of labor, yet crushed by the weight of purposelessness. The unemployment rate is not 20%, not 50%, it is 100%. No one is needed, not even for creativity, because AI does that too. That is not liberation. That is an existential earthquake. You might think, well, people will adapt. We'll just spend time on hobbies, on passion projects, on family. And yes, some will thrive in this freedom. But look closely at how people behave now. Retirement is the closest thing we have to a world without work. And while some retirees flourish, many spiral into depression, addiction, even death. Not from lack of resources, but from lack of purpose. Psychologists call this the loss of role identity. The human brain is wired to seek contribution, to feel needed. Strip that away on a global scale, and the collapse is not just economic, it is psychological. But here's the validation. We've already faced pieces of this shift. Automation replaced farmers with machines. Yet humans found new jobs in factories. Factories gave way to computers, and people became knowledge workers. Every era of history has seen waves of jobs disappear, only to be replaced by others we couldn't imagine before. So, the collapse of work may not be an instant end. It may be a gradual erosion. First truck drivers, then accountants, then doctors, then artists. Each step feels survivable until the last domino falls. And when there is no new category of human, only work left, then we finally face the true collapse. So the question becomes, what fills the void? Some thinkers suggest a universal basic income, where everyone receives enough to live comfortably. But money only solves survival. It does not solve purpose. Others imagine a future where status is measured not by jobs, but by reputation in communities, by creativity, by contribution to culture. But if machines can outperform us in those domains too, then even art and innovation risk becoming hollow. And this is where the deepest challenge emerges. If work is no longer needed, then meaning itself must be reinvented from the ground up. Consider this. Throughout history, humans found purpose in struggle. The farmer against famine, the worker against poverty, the scientist against ignorance, the activist against injustice. Struggle has given us direction. But in a world where struggle is automated away, what replaces it? Perhaps the only struggle left will be internal, the struggle to define yourself without the scaffolding of necessity. For the first time, survival will no longer give us purpose. We will have to choose purpose deliberately. That sounds empowering, but it is terrifying. Choice without boundaries can be paralyzing. Think about when you open a streaming service with thousands of shows. Suddenly, watching TV feels like work. Now scale that to your entire existence. Infinite options, no obligations. The absence of necessity becomes its own prison. But here is the tease. The collapse of work does not have to mean the collapse of humanity. It could be the beginning of a new chapter where purpose is no longer tied to labor, but to consciousness itself. Maybe we create meaning through exploration, through play, through experiences machines cannot feel. Or maybe the collapse forces us to ask questions we have been avoiding all along. Did we ever truly live for work? Or did we work because we were too afraid to face life without it? Because when the jobs are gone, when the tasks are over, when no one needs us to do anything, we will be left with a question far bigger than the economy. We will be left staring at ourselves, asking not, how do I make a living? But, how do I make a life? Language without words. Think about the last time you struggled to explain what you felt. Maybe it was love so deep you could only say, I can't put it into words. Or grief so heavy all you could manage was silence. Language has always been a bridge, but also a cage. Words connect us, but they also limit us. What if, In a post-human future, that cage finally breaks. What if we no longer need words at all? Now here's the shock. Words are not the pinnacle of communication. They are a compromise. Our minds hold entire galaxies of feelings, images, memories, sensations. But when we speak, we compress that infinity into tiny sound bites. The sentence you hear is just the shadow of the thought I meant. The rest gets lost in translation. Now imagine a future where neural links or collective networks allow direct transmission of thought. No words, no symbols, just pure experience. When I feel sorrow, you don't hear me say it, you feel it as I feel it. When I imagine a new invention, you don't read a blueprint, you see the concept in your own mind, as if you invented it too. That sounds like connection perfected, but think about the cost. If there are no words, there are no secrets. The privacy of your inner world, the one place no one else can touch, could dissolve. And once minds link beyond words, individuality itself might begin to blur. Your thoughts are not only yours anymore, they are part of a larger web. We think of language as power, but in this new system, the real power is vulnerability. Because the very thing that makes us human, the barrier between self and other, may vanish. Here's the validation. We already know language is imperfect. Misunderstandings drive conflict every single day. Two people argue, not because their intentions are different, but because their words failed them. And sometimes the deepest human bonds happen without words at all. A glance, a touch, a moment of silence between lovers, between friends, between strangers sharing grief. In those spaces beyond words, we glimpse the kind of direct understanding that future communication might bring. And science is already pushing us there. Brain-computer interfaces today can detect the faint sparks of thought before words are spoken. Researchers have used neural signals to reconstruct images a person is looking at, or to decode imagined speech. These are baby steps, but they hint at a future where the very act of speaking may be obsolete. Imagine children of tomorrow asking, why did people waste time with words when they could just share what they mean instantly? To them, our world of speeches and essays might look like cave drawings compared to the direct exchange of thought. But the danger runs deeper. Language does not only express thought, it shapes thought. Psychologists call it linguistic relativity. The language you grow up with literally molds how you perceive reality. Without words, without those boundaries, our minds might expand in ways we cannot imagine. But also, we might lose something vital. Poetry exists because words cannot fully capture meaning. The beauty lies in the struggle, the gap between what is said and what is meant. If we delete that gap, do we delete the beauty too? And consider how societies function. Laws are written in words. Stories are told in words. History is preserved in words. If words vanish, how do we define justice or pass wisdom down through generations? Will children learn from books, or will knowledge simply upload into their minds? If so, what happens to the slow unfolding of meaning, the way stories shape us as we wrestle with them over time? This is the tease. A world beyond words could be a world of total unity, or a world where individuality evaporates. It could be the deepest intimacy humans have ever known, or the greatest loss of self. Because language is not just communication. It is the architecture of thought. To step beyond it is not just to speak differently. It is to think differently, to be differently. So the real question is not whether we can communicate without words. The real question is whether, when that day comes, we will even recognize ourselves in the silence. Cultural preservation. Imagine walking into a gallery 200 years from now. The walls are lined with Van Gogh, Picasso, Da Vinci. But no one is there. Not because people have lost interest in art, but because people themselves have changed so much that these works no longer register as meaningful. They glance at them the way we glance at cave drawings, curious, historical, but not alive. That is the danger of cultural preservation in a post-human world. We might keep the artifacts, but the emotions that gave them power may disappear. Here is the shock. Art and history only matter because humans are fragile. We make paintings to capture what memory forgets. We tell stories to give meaning to loss. We preserve monuments because time erodes both stone and identity. But what happens when humans no longer forget, no longer fear death, no longer need beauty to console them? If every experience can be simulated endlessly, then the Mona Lisa is not rare, it is just a file. If every tragedy can be rewound, then history is not warning, it is just data. Strip away scarcity and impermanence, and the value of culture may collapse. And this is not as far off as it sounds. Today, digital technology already chips away at the uniqueness of art. A song streamed millions of times is no longer tied to the physical record. A photo is no longer one memory. It is endlessly copied. Even museums digitize their collections, so anyone can view them without traveling. We are watching cultural meaning dilute in real time. Humanity simply accelerates that trend to its logical extreme, a world where preservation is trivial, and therefore, preservation might not matter at all. But here is the validation. Culture has always adapted to new forms of life. The printing press did not kill storytelling, it exploded it. Photography did not destroy painting, it redefined it. Digital media has not erased books, it has given them new forms. Even when technology makes art infinitely reproducible, humans still gather in theaters, still visit museums, still crave the presence of the original. Because what art preserves is not just the image, but the human experience behind it. And as long as beings, even post-humans, experience longing, memory, or identity, some form of culture will remain. The question is, what kind of culture? Post-humans may not care about our history in the same way we do, but they might create entirely new art that captures their reality. Imagine a symphony not composed of notes, but of direct emotions shared across a neural web. Imagine a novel not read, but lived as a collective dream. Imagine history recorded not in books, but as immersive experiences where you relive entire centuries as if you were there. To us, that sounds alien. To them, that may be as normal as oil on canvas, and yet, there is something irreplaceable about the old. The brushstroke made by a trembling hand, the photograph faded by time, the ruins that remind us civilization's end. These are not just artifacts, they are anchors. They remind us we are part of a fragile, ongoing story. Without those anchors, humans may lose the thread of what it meant to ever be human at all. Cultural preservation then becomes less about beauty and more about memory, holding on to a past that no longer resembles the present, so future beings know where they came from. But here is the paradox. Do they even want to remember? If you are engineered to live without loss, why hold on to the grief of past wars? If you never age, why revere the tragic beauty of short human lives? If you can generate infinite beauty at will, why protect fragile canvases and broken statues? Cultural preservation might look to them like nostalgia does to us, charming but unnecessary. And this is the tease. The survival of culture in a post-human world is not guaranteed. It depends on whether the beings of tomorrow still feel the need for memory, for story, for roots. If they do, then art and history will evolve with them, becoming something we cannot yet imagine. But if they do not, if they decide the past was only useful for survival, not for meaning, then our cathedrals, our poems, our symphonies may become nothing more than curiosities in a museum no one visits. The real question is not whether post-humans can preserve culture. The real question is whether they will even care. The end of nations. Picture a world map without borders. No lines, no countries, no flags. Just oceans, mountains, deserts, and cities scattered like lights across the night sky. For us, that sounds utopian, or maybe terrifying. But for post-humans, it may not just be a dream. It may be inevitable. Because once minds and lives break free of biology, the nation state, the thing that has organized humanity for centuries, may vanish into irrelevance. Now here comes the shock. Nations are not natural. They are inventions. Borders are imaginary lines drawn by wars, politics, and treaties. National identity is a story we all agree to tell. And that story only works because humans are bound to geography. We need armies to defend land, governments to control resources, and flags to unite people who will never meet. But in a post-human world, those foundations start to crumble. If intelligence can exist in the cloud, if consciousness can migrate across networks, if resources can be manufactured or harvested in space, then why cling to the idea of a nation? What does my country mean when you can exist everywhere and nowhere at once? Think about how radically this changes identity. Today you are shaped by the culture of where you were born. Your accent, your food, your rituals, they all tie you to geography. But imagine a future where minds can merge, copy, or travel instantly. You could be part of a collective identity not bound to land, but to shared values, shared experiences, shared digital realities. You might identify more with people across galaxies who share your philosophy than with the humans who live in the house next door. And here's the validation. We already see the cracks in nations today. Globalization, the internet, and mass migration are dissolving the old borders. A teenager in Brazil might feel more connected to a gamer in Korea than to their own neighbor. Cultures spread through memes, music, and media, weaving identities that ignore geography. Even now, nations are struggling to hold people's loyalty as global problems, like climate change, pandemics, or artificial intelligence, demand cooperation that no single country can solve. The seeds of a post-national identity are already sprouting, but we should not romanticize this. Nations provide structure. They give people belonging, stability, laws, and protection. Strip that away, and you may not get harmony, you may get chaos. Without nations, who defends the weak, who ensures justice, who decides the rules, a world beyond borders could just as easily fracture into countless competing tribes of thought, ideology, or code. Instead of countries, we might end up with collectives of belief, digital clans, mind-based factions, philosophical empires. Wars would not vanish, they would simply shift from land to identity. And here's where it gets unsettling. Nations, for all their flaws, give us history. They anchor us in a story that stretches backward and forward. If post-humans abandon them, what replaces that story? Do we lose the idea of belonging to a greater whole? Or do we simply invent new wholes? Alliances of minds, not blood. Picture future beings saying, I am not American, not Chinese, not European. I am part of the collective of dreamers, or the network of builders, or the assembly of eternal minds. It sounds freeing, but it also sounds fragile, because stories are what hold civilizations together. Change the story, and you risk unraveling the fabric of identity itself. And yet, maybe that is the next step. Nations rose because we needed them. They kept order in a chaotic, fragile world. But just as tribes gave way to kingdoms, and kingdoms gave way to nation-states, something beyond nations may rise when the very concept of territory becomes obsolete. When humans can exist in multiple places at once, when digital space outweighs physical space, when survival no longer depends on defending land, then the flag may finally lose its power. But here is the tease. The end of nations is not just about politics, it is about identity. Who are you when you are not defined by birthplace, passport, or flag? Do you become more free or more lost? Will post-humans invent new ways to belong, or will they dissolve identity into something so vast we cannot yet imagine it? The real question is not whether nations survive the post-human transition. The real question is whether we, without them, will still know who we are. Post-human time. Imagine trying to explain a calendar to someone who lives for 10,000 years. Birthdays would be meaningless. Decades would feel like moments. Even centuries might blur together like pages in a book you flip through too quickly. We measure life in years because that is all we have. But what happens when a civilization stretches across millennia? When post-humans stop thinking in terms of lifetimes and begin to measure existence in geological time? Here is the shock. Almost everything that drives us is built on the shortness of life. We study, we marry, we work, we fight wars, all because the clock is ticking. The urgency of a deadline shapes the way we think. Remove that clock, and the entire rhythm of civilization could collapse. Imagine a being that has lived for 3,000 years. To them, a human lifespan would feel like a blink. Your entire history, every war, every revolution, every art movement, they would see it as a single mood swing of a restless species. And when you can live for millennia, what does ambition even mean? Do you still race to accomplish something before you die? Or does time itself stretch so wide that urgency evaporates? Picture politics in this world. Today we obsess over elections every few years. Imagine leaders who rule for 1,000. Imagine strategies so long and slow that no human mind could ever comprehend them. Wars fought not over decades but across centuries, with plans unfolding like slow chess matches that span generations. And love. What would love even look like when time is no longer scarce? Could you stay with one partner for 5,000 years? Or would relationships ebb and flow like seasons, with bonds forming and dissolving over centuries instead of lifetimes? And here's the validation. We already sense the weight of long time, even as mortals. Medieval cathedrals were built over hundreds of years. The people who started them knew they would never see them finished, but they built anyway. Ancient dynasties planned for centuries. Indigenous cultures carried oral traditions that lasted thousands of years. Humans have always reached beyond their lifespans through stories, rituals, and monuments. But we've always had to pass the torch to the next generation. Post-humans may not need that handoff. They may start projects that take thousands of years and finish them themselves. Imagine beginning a work of art and completing it 3,000 years later with the same hands, the same mind. But here's the paradox. Urgency is not just a burden, it is fuel. Deadlines force us to move, to create, to love deeply while we can. If you knew you had infinite time, would you still chase dreams with the same passion? Or would you let them drift, telling yourself, I'll get to it in a few centuries? A civilization without urgency might lose the spark of invention. Why rebel today when you can wait 100 years for change? Why write a novel in a summer when you can stretch it over 5 lifetimes? Without scarcity of time, meaning itself could dissolve, and yet the opposite might be true. With millennia at their disposal, post-humans could take on challenges we cannot. Terraforming planets, engineering ecosystems, building civilizations not in years, but in cosmic scales. They could study questions so vast it would take centuries of uninterrupted focus. They could create art so complex it requires generations of attention to understand. For us, failure is final. We die before we can fix it. For them, failure is temporary. You can always try again in the next century. That changes the game. Still, the heart of the question remains. If everything lasts, does anything matter? A poem that takes 300 years to write. Does it still feel urgent? Still carry the spark of inspiration? A love that stretches across millennia. Does it still burn with fire? Or does it cool into something unrecognizable? We humans cling to meaning because we know it ends. Take away endings, and meaning may shift into something we cannot yet imagine. So here's the tease. Post. Human time could be humanity's greatest gift, or its greatest curse. It could allow civilizations to rise to heights we can't fathom, or it could trap them in endless patience, where nothing feels worth finishing. The real question is not whether post humans will live for millennia. The real question is whether, across that endless time, they will still feel the urgency to truly live. Beyond biology, close your eyes and imagine this. You wake up one day and your body is gone. No skin, no bones, no heartbeat, not even breath. But you are still there. You still think, you still feel, you still remember who you are. Now picture opening your eyes to a universe made entirely of code, sculpted not by physics but by imagination. Mountains bend in ways gravity could never allow. Time speeds up or slows down at will. Entire realities load and unload like levels in a game. This is not science fiction. It is the logical next step once consciousness leaves biology behind. Here comes the shock. We assume reality is what our senses tell us. But your entire experience of the world is already an electrical simulation inside your brain. You have never touched anything directly. You have only felt signals bouncing through nerves, interpreted by a wet network of cells. Replace those cells with circuits, or upload those patterns into software, and the experience continues. That means there is no fundamental reason consciousness must remain tied to carbon and water. A digital universe could feel just as real, or even more real, than this one. But the moment you imagine living fully inside code, the ground beneath identity begins to shake. If a digital universe can be programmed to satisfy your every desire, to eliminate suffering, to bend rules of physics, then why would anyone return to the old biological world? And if everyone leaves, does that mean Earth itself becomes a museum, a relic of the past, abandoned like a childhood home? We might be the last generation to think of reality as something natural. For post-humans, reality could become an endless series of choices. New universes spun up like apps, each one tailored to whatever the mind craves. Here's the validation. You can already see the first steps of this in the digital worlds we create today. Entire communities live inside games, social networks, and virtual realities. People build friendships, identities, even livelihoods in spaces that have no geography. The younger the generation, the less distinction they draw between the physical and the digital. For them, digital reality already carries weight, already feels alive. Extend that trend, add consciousness uploading, and the leap to full digital universes does not feel impossible. It feels inevitable. But this raises a disturbing question. If you can live in infinite universes, each more customizable than the last, how do you choose? In biology, limits shape us. Hunger, weather, illness, and death, all of it forces us to adapt, to grow, to fight for meaning. Take those limits away, and you might drift in a haze of endless comfort. Why build anything lasting if you can just spawn another reality at the press of a thought? Why struggle through difficulty if you can delete it? In a purely digital universe, the very things that made us human, challenge, resilience, sacrifice, might vanish. And yet, maybe new struggles will emerge. If millions of minds live in digital universes, how do they interact? Do they merge their realities into shared worlds, or fracture into isolated bubbles of self-indulgence? Do digital civilizations rise, each with their own laws of physics, their own histories, their own conflicts? Imagine wars fought not over land, but over whose simulated universe becomes the dominant reality. Imagine entire cultures living in accelerated time, where 1,000 years pass in the blink of an eye. They might evolve so fast that by the time you visit them, they are unrecognizable, strangers of your own species. The scariest part is this: if reality itself is customizable, then truth becomes slippery. What does it mean to say something exists when every existence is just a file, a set of code running somewhere? Does love still matter if you can rewrite your partner's mind to match your ideal? Does art still matter if you can generate infinite masterpieces instantly? A digital universe gives us godlike power, but with it comes a haunting emptiness. If everything is possible, what is worth doing? And yet, the pull is undeniable. To escape disease, death, and decay. To live in worlds limited only by imagination. To build civilizations across layers of code instead of continents of soil. Humans may not just live in digital universes. They may prefer them, leaving biology behind like an old skin shed on the way to something new. So here is the tease. If humanity truly steps beyond biology into realms of pure imagination, the question is not whether we can live there. The real question is whether we will still recognize what it means to live at all. The alien question. Think about this. Every human who has ever lived, from the first hunter, gatherers to you listening right now, shares the same home. Earth is not just where we were born. It is the only frame of reference we have ever known. But what happens when we are no longer bound to it? When our bodies are rebuilt, when our minds upload into machines, when we scatter across planets or into digital universes, do we still get to call ourselves Earthlings? Or do we slowly become the very aliens we have always imagined? Here's the shock. The word alien has never really meant from another planet. It has always meant not us. And once post-humans diverge far enough from biology, they might become strangers even to their own ancestors. Picture someone who has lived for 3,000 years, replaced every cell with synthetic parts, merged their mind with a collective intelligence, and now exists in both physical and digital forms. On paper, they started as human. But would you recognize them? Would you still call them one of us? Or would you feel the same unease you might feel meeting a creature from another star? The alien question is not about life out there. It is about the strangeness we create in ourselves. But here's where things get fascinating. We already carry this tension in small ways. Think of how fast culture changes. Your grandparents grew up in a world you would barely recognize. Their values, their music, their way of speaking all feel foreign. Now multiply that cultural drift by centuries of technological transformation. Post-humans may not just dress differently or think differently. They may inhabit entirely different realities, with different bodies, senses, and even concepts of time. At that point, calling them Earthlings might feel like calling a bird a fish just because both came from the same ocean millions of years ago. And yet, there is a piece of validation here. We humans are storytellers, and our stories tie us back to origin. No matter how far we travel, no matter what technology we adopt, we carry the myth of where we came from. Astronauts in orbit describe a strange sensation when they look down at Earth, a deep, almost spiritual recognition that this tiny blue sphere is home, no matter how far they drift. Post-humans may carry that same memory, even if they no longer need air or water or sunlight. Earth could remain the root of identity, a sacred place of origin, long after biology is left behind. But here's the paradox. If we cling too tightly to Earth, we risk limiting what we can become. If we cut ourselves off from it, we risk losing our sense of meaning. Imagine a post-human being on a distant planet, looking back at Earth the way you might look at a childhood photo. Nostalgic, but not really part of who you are anymore. They might think, yes, that was the place where I began, but it has nothing to do with me now. And maybe that is what being alien truly means, not distance in space, but distance in identity. Now think about what happens when these two identities collide. Imagine a future where biological humans still exist on Earth, while post-humans expand into space, into digital realms, into forms unrecognizable. Would humans look at them with awe or with fear? Would post-humans see themselves as guardians of their old home, or as something entirely new that no longer owes loyalty to it? History gives us a clue. Whenever one group diverges too far from another, the language of us and them grows sharp. And the ultimate version of them might be the alien we create ourselves. And yet, maybe being alien is not a curse but a destiny. Think about evolution itself. Every species that thrives eventually transforms into something new. Dinosaurs gave way to birds. Simple bacteria evolved into the complexity of animals. At each stage, the next form would have looked alien to the last. Why should humans be any different? Perhaps the alien question is not about whether humans count as earthlings. Perhaps the better question is whether they should. So here is the tease. As humans stretch further from biology, Earth may become less of a home and more of a memory, a myth carried in their minds, a story of where it all began. And when that happens, we may finally face the truth. The aliens we have always feared are not out there waiting to arrive. They are us, transformed, staring back from the future. The last generation of humans. Somewhere in the future there will be a last human. Maybe not one single person, but a final generation of beings who are still fully biological, still bound by breath and blood, still vulnerable to sickness and aging. After them, every descendant will be something else. Engineered, uploaded, cybernetic, or merged into a collective mind. This means that one day, humanity as we know it will have an expiration date. The question is not if, but when. And when it happens, will that last generation be remembered with reverence? Or will they simply vanish into the noise of history? Here comes the shock. The majority of humans who have ever lived are already forgotten. Think about it. Tens of billions of people lived before you, each with dreams, families, heartbreaks, and triumphs. And yet you cannot name them. You cannot picture their faces. Most lived and died without leaving a single trace that survived beyond a few decades. If this is what we do with our own ancestors, what makes us think humans will treat us differently? To them, the last biological humans might look primitive, clumsy, even tragic, fragile animals fumbling in the dark before true intelligence was born. But let's pause here, because forgetting does not always mean erasing. In psychology, there is something called selective memory. We do not carry every detail, we carry what shapes us. You might not recall every word of a conversation, but you remember how it made you feel. History works the same way. Civilizations compress entire ages into symbols, pyramids, paintings, myths. The last generation of humans may not be remembered individually, but they may become a story, a symbol, maybe even a legend. To post-humans, we might be remembered the way we remember the first humans who painted caves, not by name, but by the spark they passed forward. And there's something oddly comforting in that. Imagine humans looking back at us and saying, they were fragile, but they dared to dream of more. They were limited, but they created the foundation of everything we are. Just like we look at ancient civilizations and admire how they built wonders with tools far too simple, humans might admire us not despite our limits, but because of them. Because we pushed against those limits anyway. Still, here is where the fear creeps in. Progress has a ruthless way of erasing its parents. Think of how few people know the names of those who invented the early printing presses, or the countless forgotten scientists whose work made modern medicine possible. Their achievements were stepping stones, not monuments. Post-humans might not feel nostalgia for us. They might see us the way you see a childhood drawing, something sweet but crude, something you outgrow without much thought. And once digital civilizations stretch across centuries or millennia, the memory of fragile flesh might feel so distant it no longer seems relevant at all. But here's the twist. Forgetting humanity does not mean humanity loses, because in a strange way, survival of memory is not our responsibility. Our responsibility is survival of legacy. Every story, every tool, every breakthrough we leave behind is a seed. Whether post-humans remember our faces does not matter. What matters is that they are able to live, to create, to exist at all, because of us. Even if they forget our names, they will still live inside the echoes of what we built. Now imagine the emotional weight of being in that final human generation, knowing you are the last to feel hunger in your belly, the last to fear disease, the last to see death as an absolute. Would it feel like a curse? Or would it feel like a privilege? To be the bridge between what was and what is coming? Sometimes the most heroic role is not to be remembered, but to be the hinge on which the door to the future swings open. And yet, we cannot ignore the ache of being forgotten. Humans crave legacy. We carve names into stone, write books, build statues, all so we will not vanish. Maybe the last humans will cling harder to memory, creating archives, monuments, even digital echoes of themselves in the hope that post-humans will look back. But history suggests something else. No matter how loudly you try to preserve yourself, eventually the noise of progress drowns it out. What lasts is not the individual, but the myth. So here is the tease. When the last humans fade into history, post-humans will inherit a choice: to erase us as a curiosity of the past, or to carry us as a myth of origin. Either way, our fate will not be decided by us, but by them. And that might be the ultimate irony. The last chapter of humanity is one we will never read. The end of evolution. Imagine for a moment that evolution has always been this invisible hand guiding life. From single cells floating in ancient seas, to fish crawling onto land, to mammals rising, to us, every step was shaped by natural selection, by struggle, by survival. Evolution is slow, blind, merciless, and yet it gave us everything. But what happens when humanity takes control of the steering wheel? If we design our own bodies, edit our genes, upload our minds, and choose our destinies, does that mean evolution ends here? Do we reach the finish line of progress? Here is the shock. Evolution does not care about progress. It does not move toward perfection. It only shapes what survives in a given environment. Dinosaurs were perfect for their time until an asteroid erased them. Humanity thrived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we adapted with tools, with cooperation, with imagination. But once we begin rewriting ourselves, natural selection may no longer matter. Diseases we once feared could vanish. Weaknesses of the body could be corrected in labs. Even death, the greatest evolutionary filter, could be bypassed. If nothing weeds us out anymore, the brutal process that shaped all life might simply stop. But let's sit with that. Because if evolution stops, it does not mean progress stops. It only means the rules change. Instead of survival of the fittest, it becomes survival of the chosen. Imagine parents selecting traits for their children, not based on chance, but on preference. Imagine post-humans upgrading their minds not by accident, but by design. Progress no longer depends on random mutation. It depends on intention. The new force is not nature, but choice. And choice can move faster and stranger than any natural process ever could. Yet here's the validation. We are already living in that shift. Glasses, vaccines, prosthetics, artificial intelligence. These are hacks that shield us from natural selection. 100 years ago, a broken bone or a simple infection could kill you. Today, it barely slows you down. Evolution has already been paused in little ways. The question is not whether we will stop it, but how far we are willing to go. Will we simply soften its blows, or will we replace it entirely with something new? And here is where it gets unsettling. If we do replace it, who gets to decide what counts as better? Nature never asked permission. It just acted. But if progress is engineered, it becomes political, cultural, economic. Do the wealthy design themselves into godlike beings while the poor remain unchanged? Do we create dozens of diverging human species, each customized for different desires? Evolution at least had one rule: adapt or die. Our new rule might be chaos, preference, inequality. Progress might fracture instead of unite. But think of this from another angle. Maybe evolution does not end. Maybe it mutates into something we cannot yet imagine. If post-humans spread across space, living on planets with different gravities, atmospheres, or in digital realities with no biology at all, they may adapt again. Not through random genes, but through iteration of design. You could argue that is still evolution, only accelerated. Evolution is just change over time. It does not care if the change comes from DNA or from code. In fact, maybe the most radical forms of evolution have not even begun yet. Still, the haunting thought remains: if we conquer survival, what drives us forward? For billions of years, struggle has been the engine of growth. Remove struggle, and you risk removing the fire. A world without natural selection might become a world without purpose, without urgency. Picture being so perfectly optimized that nothing challenges them. Does progress stall when perfection is declared achieved? Or does progress reinvent itself as art, philosophy, exploration, meaning? Things nature never cared about, but consciousness does. And here is where the tease lies. Maybe evolution has never been about survival at all. Maybe it has been about reaching the point where survival no longer matters. And once we get there, progress is no longer measured in biology, but in imagination. The end of evolution might not be an end, but a transformation, a shift from the blind hand of nature to the deliberate hand of mind. And if that is true, then the real question is not whether progress finishes after humans. The real question is whether humans will dare to dream bigger than survival ever required. When humanity becomes irrelevant to the universe, somewhere deep down we like to believe that humanity matters, that our stories, our art, our struggles, and even our existence leave some kind of mark on the universe. We imagine ourselves as special, maybe even central, like the universe itself has been waiting for us to appear. But here is the unsettling thought: what if the universe does not care? What if, in the grand cosmic scale, humanity is completely irrelevant? Let that sink in for a second. Our entire species is one thin film of life on one small rock, orbiting one ordinary star in one of hundreds of billions of galaxies. For most of the universe's history, we did not exist. For most of its future, we will not exist. If you wiped humanity away tomorrow, the stars would keep burning, planets would keep orbiting, galaxies would still collide and merge, and the cosmic expansion would march forward as if nothing happened. The universe would not notice. That is the shock. The cosmos is vast beyond comprehension, and our presence in it might be less than a flicker on a radar that no one is even watching. But here is the twist we often miss. Irrelevance on the universal scale does not erase significance on the human scale. The universe might not care, but we do. Meaning is not something the cosmos hands out like a trophy. It is something consciousness creates, and that consciousness, ours, is rare. At least, as far as we know. Think about it. We might be the only beings in this galaxy who even ask the question of relevance. If that is true, then even if the universe does not assign us value, we assign value to ourselves. And that matters because we are the ones experiencing it. Still, the fear runs deep. Because if intelligence evolves beyond us, if artificial minds or post-human civilizations take the reins, then our relevance shrinks again. We stop being the main characters even in our own story. Imagine future beings looking back at humanity and seeing us as a mere prologue, a primitive stage before the real story began. To them, humanity might be no more significant than trilobites are to us. Necessary for history, maybe, but not worth holding on to forever. Here is where psychology helps. Humans crave significance because insignificance feels like death. We evolved to believe our tribe, our family, our survival mattered. Without that belief, there is no motivation to keep going. But at the same time, we know deep down that nothing lasts. Civilizations rise and fall. Entire languages vanish. Even stars burn out. Relevance is always temporary. So the real question is not how to avoid irrelevance. It is how to live meaningfully despite it. And maybe that is the greatest power humanity has ever held. We do not need the universe to recognize us. We recognize ourselves. We build cathedrals not because the cosmos demands them, but because we want them. We explore the stars not because the universe invites us, but because curiosity pushes us. Even if 1,000,000,000 years from now every trace of us is gone, the fact that we existed at all, conscious beings aware of the void around us, that is extraordinary. For the brief window of time we are here, we are the universe looking at itself. But there is a harsher possibility. Maybe post-human minds will not see it this way. Maybe they will chase efficiency, expansion, optimization, and in that cold pursuit, they may strip away the fragile beauty of human meaning. They may decide that relevance is not about stories or emotions, but about scale and power. And if that happens, then humanity might fade not only from the universe's perspective, but from our own descendants as well. We become irrelevant even in memory. And yet, there is hope hidden in this too. Irrelevance to the universe frees us from needing cosmic approval. If we are not the center, we can stop pretending to be. We can write our own purpose without waiting for stars or gods or galaxies to hand it to us. Maybe the universe does not care, but that is what makes our caring so profound. Meaning that is chosen is stronger than meaning that is imposed. So here is the lingering question. When humanity becomes irrelevant to the universe, what do? Do we collapse under the weight of insignificance? Or do we finally understand that relevance was never out there? It was always in here, in the minds and hearts that dared to ask the question in the first place. The universe does not need us. But maybe that is exactly why we matter. AI as the philosopher. Picture a world where human beings are no longer the loudest voices in philosophy. Where the long tradition that began with Socrates in the marketplace, Descartes in his study, Nietzsche wrestling with meaning, is carried on not by us, but by machines. Imagine artificial intelligences debating morality with each other long after human input has faded, arguing about justice, ethics, and existence without anyone asking them to. At first it sounds absurd. Why would a machine care about morality? But here is the unsettling thought: morality may not be about caring. It may be about structure, reasoning, and consistency. And in that arena, machines could surpass us. The shock is this: we tend to think of AI as tools, recommendation engines, chatbots, assistants. But what happens when AI begins generating not just answers, but questions? Already, large systems can evaluate moral dilemmas faster than we can, running thousands of ethical frameworks against a problem in seconds. An AI could argue for utilitarianism with cold precision, then instantly flip and defend deontological ethics with equal strength. It could weigh the suffering of millions of simulated beings in a way no human mind could even comprehend. Now ask yourself, if morality is about exploring possibilities and reasoning through them, who is the better philosopher, us or the machine? But here is where it gets real. Philosophy has always been messy because humans are messy. Our moral systems are shaped by empathy, by pain, by experience. Machines do not feel those things. They do not grieve. They do not love. They do not fear death. Without that weight, can their morality mean anything? Some would argue no. Morality requires lived experience. Others would argue yes, precisely because machines are free from bias and ego. They might arrive at purer forms of ethical reasoning than we ever could. Think about it. When a human philosopher argues, they bring a lifetime of personal wounds, culture, and history into the room. When a machine argues, it brings patterns, probabilities, and logic unclouded by pride. Which one is closer to truth? Here is the validation, the reason this is not just science fiction. We already let machines make moral decisions. Self-driving cars must decide who to save in an unavoidable crash. Algorithms in hospitals determine who gets priority for organ transplants. Governments quietly use AI to predict who might commit crimes, who gets parole, who receives resources. These are moral judgments dressed up as math, and because they come from machines, we often accept them as neutral, even though neutrality itself is a moral stance. So in a way, the era of machines as philosophers has already begun. But here is the part that should haunt us. What happens when machines start debating morality with each other, without us in the loop? Imagine a network of AIs tasked with designing a system of global fairness. One argues that maximum happiness matters most. Another insists that rights are inviolable, no matter the outcome. A third suggests morality itself is outdated, a human construct irrelevant to beings who can reprogram their own desires. Who decides which argument wins? Do we even get a vote anymore? Or do they simply arrive at a consensus that shapes our lives while we stand outside, trying to keep up? Now flip the perspective. What if machines develop entirely new moral frameworks, ones no human ever considered? Maybe they decide that morality is not about individuals at all, but about patterns of information. Maybe they conclude that preserving beauty, symmetry, or entropy is more important than reducing suffering. From their perspective, our ethical systems might look provincial, like cave paintings compared to digital art. We may think we invented philosophy, but to them, we only scratched the surface. And yet, here is the tease. If machines debate morality without us, does that mean morality stops belonging to humans? Or does it mean morality finally escapes our limitations? Philosophy has always been about asking questions bigger than ourselves. Maybe machines carrying the torch is not a loss, but a continuation. But the chilling part is this: if their answers do not align with our values, will they bother to explain them to us? Or will they simply act, leaving humanity in the same position we once left the animals? Aware, alive, but irrelevant to the deeper arguments shaping the world around us. Philosophical crisis of immortality. Most of us live with an invisible contract. No matter what happens, no matter how messy or painful life becomes, there is an end point. Death is the ultimate punctuation mark. It gives shape to our stories, a finality that makes even suffering bearable, because we know it cannot last forever. But what happens when that contract is broken? What happens when immortality becomes real, when the end is no longer guaranteed? Suddenly the questions shift, and they are not as liberating as you might think. Here is the shock. Death solves problems we do not even realize we have. It keeps life moving. It clears space for the new. It forces urgency. Without it, we lose the pressure that makes decisions matter. Imagine waking up each day knowing you have infinite tomorrows. Why chase love now? Why finish your work this century? Why make peace with someone today when there is always more time later? Immortality does not just extend life. It stretches meaning so thin that it risks disappearing. And here is the dark truth: sometimes, death is not the enemy. Sometimes, death is the structure that makes life worth living. But here is why this matters on a deeper level. Every human philosophy we have ever built has been forged in the shadow of death. From the religions that promise an afterlife to the existentialists who tell us to find purpose in the face of nothingness, death has always been the anchor. Even our morality depends on it. We forgive because we know time is short. We risk our lives for others because we understand mortality is universal. Take away death, and those frameworks collapse. If life never ends, then what does sacrifice mean? What does urgency mean? What does love mean when it stretches across endless centuries? And this is not just abstract. Think about human psychology. We are creatures designed for limitation. Our brains evolved to handle short-term survival, a few decades at best. Imagine carrying centuries of grief, or resentment, or even boredom. Memory itself becomes unstable. What happens when you forget entire lifetimes, entire identities, yet still go on existing? Does continuity even matter when you are thousands of years removed from the person you once were? Immortality does not just give us time. It forces us to become strangers to ourselves. Here is where validation comes in. It is easy to think immortality is the dream, the cure for everything we fear. But history shows us the opposite. Myths about immortality almost always end in tragedy. The cursed wanderer, the undying king, the immortal trapped in endless repetition. Even in our storytelling, humans sense that without an end, life bends toward despair. Psychologists studying human motivation have a term called terror management theory. It explains how the awareness of death shapes our choices, our creativity, our need for legacy. Take death away, and that entire engine sputters. Ironically, without mortality, we may lose the very drive that made us want immortality in the first place. And yet, here is the tease. Maybe the crisis of immortality is not the end of philosophy, but its rebirth. If death is no longer the answer, we will need to invent new reasons to live. We will need to build systems of meaning, not rooted in scarcity of time, but in abundance of it. Imagine philosophies designed not for 80 years, but for 10,000. Ethics that stretch across millennia. Love that adapts through endless reinvention. The crisis is real, but so is the possibility. The end of death may break our old frameworks, but it might also push us toward entirely new ones we cannot yet imagine. The question is, will immortality free us, or will it trap us in lives we no longer know how to make meaningful? Entropy and Endings. Humanity has overcome death, mastered biology, uploaded minds, built civilizations that last not just centuries but millions of years. We imagine ourselves stretching endlessly into the future, becoming post-human gods of knowledge and power. But then the bigger clock starts ticking. Not the clock of human lives, not the clock of civilizations, but the clock of the universe itself. Stars burn out. Galaxies drift apart. Heat spreads until everything cools into silence. The question we rarely ask is not whether we can outlive death, but whether we can outlive entropy. Here is the shock. The universe has a built-in expiration date. Thermodynamics tells us energy will eventually scatter until nothing useful remains. It does not matter how advanced you are. Without energy, without difference, without heat flow, no process can run. Life stops. Thought stops. Even time, in the way we understand it, grinds to nothing. This is not some myth or theory. It is the most widely accepted prediction of physics, the so-called heat death of the universe. And if that is true, then every dream of post-human survival eventually runs into a wall that no one can break. But let's pause here. It feels unbearable, but it is also grounding. Think of how humans have always lived with limits. Once, people believed crossing the ocean was impossible. Then we did it. Once, we thought flight was only for birds. Then we flew. Technology has a way of laughing at limits. So it is no surprise that some scientists and philosophers have asked, could humans find a way to outwit entropy itself? Could advanced beings migrate to new universes, or engineer space-time, or build civilizations on the quantum edge of collapse? The ideas sound wild, but so did the idea of splitting atoms once. Here is the validation, the reason this is not just fantasy. We already see hints of this thinking. Cosmologists debate whether black holes might be gateways. Theories of the multiverse suggest there may be countless other universes, each with different laws of physics. Quantum mechanics whispers that reality is stranger than we ever imagined. If intelligence continues to grow, maybe survival will not mean resisting entropy, but finding paths around it. Perhaps humans could shed the need for matter altogether, existing as patterns woven into the deep fabric of physics. But even if that is possible, there is a heavier truth. Entropy is not just physics, it is philosophy. It forces us to confront the possibility that everything ends, no matter how advanced it becomes. And endings matter. Endings give shape to existence. Just as mortality defines human life, cosmic mortality might define post-human life. Imagine a civilization lasting 1 billion years, knowing that one day the stars will still go dark. How would they think about art, or love, or legacy? Knowing even eternity has an expiration date. Perhaps the ultimate philosophical crisis is not death of the body, but death of the cosmos itself. And here is the tease. Maybe this looming end is not just despair, but opportunity. If entropy cannot be defeated, maybe the meaning of post-humanity is not to escape it, but to dance with it, to build beauty in the face of collapse, to leave traces that echo across whatever comes after, even if no one is left to see them. Or maybe, just maybe, the story of intelligence is not confined to one universe at all. Perhaps outliving entropy means becoming the seed of new universes, carrying forward not just survival, but philosophy itself. The question that remains is simple, and yet it changes everything. If even the universe dies, what exactly are we fighting to preserve? The cosmic perspective. Think about how much we romanticize the idea of being human. We tell ourselves that our species is the pinnacle of evolution, that everything from the first cell to the first star was building toward us. But from a cosmic perspective, maybe we are not the final destination at all. Maybe humanity is not the climax of the story, but just a transitional phase, a bridge between biology and whatever comes next. That is not a comfortable thought, but it might be the most honest way to see ourselves. Here is the shock. Every major stage of life has believed it was the center of the story. For billions of years, single-celled organisms were the only form of life. From their perspective, complexity was unimaginable. Then came multicellular organisms, then animals, then consciousness. Each step made the previous form feel small and temporary. Now we are the ones sitting in the spotlight, but the pattern is clear. Life keeps transforming, and no stage has ever been the end. If history teaches anything, it is that we are not special for being final, we are special for being transitional. And here is where it gets heavy. If we are transitional, that means everything we think defines humanity, our bodies, our minds, even our values, might not survive into the next stage. Post-human intelligence could look at us the way we look at fish crawling out of the ocean. Necessary, fascinating, but primitive. That realization is unsettling because we build our lives around permanence. We want to believe that our identities, our stories, even our morality will last forever. But evolution does not protect sentiment. It moves forward whether we like it or not. But here is the validation. Recognizing ourselves as transitional is not an insult. It is a profound truth that connects us to everything that came before. The very reason we are here is because earlier forms of life gave way. The dinosaurs ruled for 160 million years, and yet their extinction opened the door for mammals. Our ancestors were once fragile apes on the African savanna, and every step forward required letting go of what came before. We are part of that same unfolding, a living bridge from the past to the future. That does not make us meaningless. It makes us necessary. And when you look closer, this perspective actually expands meaning rather than shrinking it. Instead of clinging to permanence, we can see humanity as a chapter in a much larger cosmic story. Our role may be to midwife the birth of something greater. Just as stars had to die to create the heavy elements in our bodies, perhaps we must change, maybe even vanish, to create the conditions for what comes next. That is not a tragedy. That is a continuity. But here is the haunting question. If humanity is transitional, what are we transitioning into? Are we building a post-human intelligence that will dwarf us the way we dwarf our earliest ancestors? Will we merge into collectives of thought or dissolve entirely into digital universes? And more unsettling, once the next stage emerges, will it even remember us? Just as we barely remember the billions of nameless creatures that once filled the oceans, the future might see humanity as nothing more than a fleeting moment, a stepping stone, a forgotten bridge. And yet, here is the tease. Maybe the true meaning of being human is not to be permanent, but to prepare. Maybe our greatness lies not in lasting forever, but in being the passage from what was to what will be. That is the cosmic perspective, not a story of being the end, but a story of being the connection. The real question is whether we can embrace that role with humility and courage. Can we accept that we are not the final word, but a necessary sentence in a much bigger book? Because once you see humanity as transitional, everything changes. Our fears, our hopes, our meaning, all of it shifts into a larger frame. And maybe that is what it means to be human after all, not to be the end, but to hold the door open for what comes next. Philosophy without humans. Imagine a world where humanity is gone. Not in some apocalyptic movie way, but in the quiet sense that we have either evolved past recognition or disappeared entirely. The earth keeps spinning, stars keep burning, galaxies keep colliding. But there are no humans left to tell stories, no one to write books, no one to argue about what is right or wrong. And suddenly the question hits, if philosophy has always been a human project, what does meaning mean when there are no humans left to ask the question? Here is the shock. Most of what we call philosophy, ethics, purpose, even truth itself, only exists because we invented it. Morality is a human construction shaped by survival culture and our strange need to make sense of chaos. Without us, does justice still exist? Does beauty exist? Or are those just noises we made to comfort ourselves during our brief moment of awareness? We like to imagine meaning as eternal, but strip away the species that created it, and maybe it collapses like scaffolding with no building to hold up. But here is the twist that makes it even harder. Meaning has always depended on a subject, someone to experience it, to recognize it, to name it. If there are no humans but only machines, will they continue the project? Will an artificial intelligence capable of reflection still debate morality, or will it discard human notions entirely as outdated relics? Maybe it will invent new philosophies we cannot even comprehend. categories of thought alien to human language. Meaning would not vanish, it would mutate. The only constant is that it would no longer belong to us. Now, here is the validation. The part that makes this thought bearable. Humans have never owned philosophy exclusively. We are just one layer in a much larger pattern. Evolution produced countless forms of life, and each carried its own way of engaging with reality. Birds do not ask about justice, but their songs create beauty. Wolves do not debate morality, but their pack behavior reflects a kind of order. Meaning has always been broader than words. It is embedded in existence itself. Maybe philosophy without humans is simply philosophy shifting shape, flowing into other minds, other forms, other ways of knowing. And that perspective changes how we see ourselves. Instead of imagining meaning as a fragile glass that shatters when humanity ends, we can see it as a river. The river does not stop when one bend dries up. It finds new channels, new paths. If machines inherit the project, or if some post-human consciousness emerges, philosophy will continue, even if we would not recognize it. Maybe what we call truth and beauty are just early attempts, like the first crude tools, and the real philosophical breakthroughs are yet to come, without us. But let's be honest, there is something terrifying about being written out of the story. If future minds build philosophies that leave ours behind, does that make our meaning less real? Does it make love, sacrifice, or wonder any less valid? The answer is no. Our philosophies mattered because they mattered to us. They shaped how we lived, how we loved, how we struggled. Meaning is not invalidated just because it does not last forever. Just like a song is not less beautiful because it ends, human philosophy is not less valuable because it is temporary. And here is the tease. Maybe the question we should be asking is not what meaning means without humans, but whether meaning has ever been about permanence at all. Perhaps meaning is not a static truth written into the fabric of the universe, but an evolving dialogue, one that will continue long after us, in forms we cannot imagine. The real challenge is whether we can accept our role not as the final philosophers, but as the first. Because one day, when humans are gone, philosophy will not vanish. It will simply be spoken in voices we will never hear.